Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 220 of the Team House. I'm Dave Park with our guest co-host Andy Milburn and our very special guest tonight, Dale Hanson. Dale, we tried to have a show with him. Dale's from the what do they call Alaska? The great state. Yeah, the great state. And we had to try to have a show with him a while back. The connection was bad, so we brought Dale down with us. MACV-SOG veteran and sculptor, writer, haikuist. Quite an accomplished career, Dale. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Real quick before we get with Dale, I just need to do a quick shout out for our sponsor. When you need dinner fast, don't call for delivery. Think HelloFresh. They're fast and fresh recipes are ready in just 15 minutes. Go to hellofresh.com/teamhouse50 and use the code teamhouse50 for 50% off plus free shipping. So now to you, Dale. So Dale, again, thank you for coming down and joining us.
A pleasure.
We had to cut your last show short because there was a little bit of bad connection, and yours is a story we want everybody to hear.
Right.
So start us with your origin story. How did you grow up, and how did you get drawn into the military?
Yeah. I was born in a tiny little town and raised in a little, it wasn't a sod house, but my grandparents were, but a clapboard 4-room house, no electricity, no water,
This
none
is
of that stuff.
northern
Outhouse.
Minnesota.
Yeah, northern Minnesota, And I spent my first years there, and then moved to International Falls, the cold spot of the United States, the northernmost town, continental United States. But my dad there were 7 brothers, and all 7 of them went to war, 4 in World War II, 2 in Korea. And then on my mom's side, it was the same thing. One of the brothers was killed in the Battle of the Bulge and stuff. But I kind of grew up in the matrix of, if you were a healthy male and your country needed you, you went. Mm-hmm. There was no excuse. People looked down at you deservedly if you didn't go to war. And I remembered hearing their stories and their wounds. And I remember once my uncle Melvin, when I got shot in the leg, showing me his back and the massive scars that he had. And so that was kind of the matrix I went through. And I got born again as a Christian when I was 5. And that might sound like just you join the Elks Club or something, not a big deal. But it was because it changed your character. And it was one of those things that drove my character. And there was a verse in the Bible that says, "And Jesus grew and waxed in wisdom and stature, in favor with God and man." And I thought, if we're supposed to be like him, we should do it in all those areas, not just religion. So it was physical, mental, spiritual, social. So growing up, I wanted to mature and be the best I could in all those. Physically, my workouts were 3 sets of 35 pull-ups and 70 in my sets of dips. So I worked out hard. I studied as far as I could intellectually, the math, the science, the language, and all that kind of a thing. And anyway, when the Vietnam War went on and communism was big, I knew philosophically and spiritually I hated communism. I hated socialism. And I wanted to do my part to stop it. But I was in college, my last year of college, and I thought, I'm seeing in the newspapers 400 people this week died. And I thought, I'm prepared to go. I'm ready to go. Physically, emotionally, mentally, I'm prepared to go. And so my last year of college, I says, I can't stand, when I'm prepared to die, watching other people who may not be. So I said, if I'm going to quit, though, I'm going to be in the best there was. And there was one more aspect that really solidified my decision to go. And if you were to take the 12 apostles in the Bible, and someone did a study and said, how many people, living and dead totaled, over 2,000 years, heard the basic story? And I don't know where they got the conclusions, but they said 1 billion. And then in 1918, all the communist leaders, there just happened to be 12 of them that got together, and they were going to do the entire world. And of course, you had the Stalin and all the rest of them. And they got together in 1918, the Russian Revolution, etc. And from 1968, when I enlisted, from 1918, that's 50 years. So in 50 years, I asked some people, how many people living and dead had heard the story of Christ, just the basic story? Mm-hmm. And they said 2 billion. And so I thought, in a prospect of twice as many people becoming communist in 50 years as had even heard the story in 2,000 years, there's a significant danger that needed to be arrested. And so that's it. And with confidence and with conviction, I should say, I just quit and enlisted and said, I'm going to be here till the war ends. You know.
And faith, because your book, your phenomenal book, you know, On Your Time in MACV-SOG, is called Born Twice.
Right.
And people read this book, you will not be disappointed. Yeah. And that's part of that, right? That first.
There's two aspects. Right. Born Twice is the biggest reason is that the change of characters, because I think my memoir is a little different than most of them you've read in the sense that I spend maybe 50, 60 pages, to back up. When I was overseas once, I watched one of the Vietnamese gals wash our clothes. And she hung it on the concertina wire to dry. And it was laid out flat, no body inside it. And it had his jump wings, his combat infantry badge, his rank, his name, all these things, and a SOG patch. And I looked at the thing and I said, it's flat. It's just an empty uniform. There's nobody in it. Mm-hmm. And it just so happened he got killed that day. And I watched him come in hanging underneath a helicopter with his pant legs, empty legs, just blowing backwards. And I thought, if I'm going to write, I want to put the character, the people that volunteered for the most dangerous unit in American history. I wanted to put a character, a person in there. In writing a book, they say if you don't flesh out the character, nobody cares what's going to happen to him. Mm-hmm. And so I spent those pages at the beginning talking about character, what made me who I was. That's the first half of Born mm-hmm. Twice. The second half, there's a motto in Special Forces. I think it's John Stuart Mill. It says, you have never lived till you've almost died. For those who fight for it, life has a flavor the protected will never know. And most of us who are overseas and just barely come back, it's almost like you were born again. You have a new life. You have a new lease on life, new outlook on life. And so when I was writing, I wanted to make sure those aspects were in there. Anyway, so we'll see.
And so then you were in your last year of college, Vietnam. Well, around what year was that? So Vietnam was already going on.
Yeah, I graduated from high school in '65, so it was end of '68. I actually took double loads. Okay. And like a fool, I took the hardest classes. I mean, Greek, theology, ethics, exegesis, and the whole deal, and worked full time. So maybe I quit college just to get away.
Vietnam was it was a kind of prospect.
Yeah, no kidding.
And what was your first stop into the Army?
Enlisting. Mm-hmm. Fort Campbell, I think it was. And I made an undergraduate out of there, and I got promoted out of that. And I could not believe what I would do with $64 a month. Amazing. And then I went to advanced infantry training, was undergraduate out of that, 3 of us were, and I got promoted out of that one too. But that was an interesting one because it's a secret advanced infantry. It's amazing. Most people have never heard of it, but it was out of Fort Gordon, 10 miles in the woods, and it was paid for by excess government funds, they said. And it was all designed for commandos and airborne. And we lived in Quonset huts. We're 10 miles in the woods, and a bunch of sadistic people that ran the thing. We were up at 3 and in bed at 11 to 12, that kind of thing. And they just ran you ragged, And that's where I took the Special Forces test, because I enlisted with the guarantee that I could try.
And that's why you ended up in AIT? Is that right?
Yeah, that was AIT. And 600 of it. They did a battalion at a time. And there were 600 of us that took the test. Only 3 of us passed for Special Forces. So it's pretty demanding.
What was the test back then?
Well, I don't know what the test is now, so I can't tell you if it's different, but they gave you 3 tests at the same time. One was oral. They played the recorder. And the moment that was done, you had to put on an answer because they were going to the next. There was one that was written, and then there was a third one, and I don't remember exactly how that was presented. But all three were going on at exactly the same time, and you had no thinking time at the end of it because it went to the next one. And I think it was designed to put pressure on. So, a lot of people can cogitate and come up with some plausible answer, and this was, they wanted people who could think reflexively, and that was part of it.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Wait, when you think back to that, that seems, because selection and assessment have become so scientific since then. But and so it sounds to us almost rudimentary, right? Almost random, and yet, reading your book and other books about the SOG era, it worked, right? I mean,
it worked. Yes.
Am I wrong? But it seemed like. You guys, when you write about your experiences, there doesn't seem to be a lot of weak links in the chain. So something back then really did work.
Right. What's wrong with modern movies is that you'll have some blonde-haired captain who comes in and is supposed to save the world, and then he goes in and he finds 12 derelict Green Berets, and he has to whip them into shape and teach them, and they all have their problems and all that stuff. The biggest fallacy of movies. The thing is that in special forces, there are no privates. They're all specialized people. They're trained. They have the intelligence. They can think under pressure. And any one of them could have taken that team and been Miss Captain Wonderful. And so what you were saying is exactly true. There's a uniformity in special forces. What is it? The movie or the song, if you don't know, then I can't tell you. The Badge of Courage. You remember that?
Yeah.
And obviously it's the beret.
Yeah.
And it's a uniform thing. If you got that, it tells you that you all have that character.
Yeah. So were you aware of special forces when you were going into this advanced infantry training?
I don't think I was. The closest I came to it was my father. And there was SAS and OSS and all the rest. But common people like you and I, before the war, probably never heard of such a thing. But I think I mentioned in my book that my dad joined just before Pearl Harbor in World War II. And they weren't going to take him because they discovered he was colorblind. But he insisted and persisted, and they got through. But they discovered the fact that he was colorblind meant he couldn't tell blue and green, which meant camouflage didn't help. And so they had the front lines. He was an Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal. Your Marines take credit for it all, but there was a certain Army group that was attached to them all.
I know all about that from jump school. We're reminded every day.
And they anyway, he was in Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal, and Tinian, and a couple others. And but they had the front line, and then they had the outposts, and then they had what they called second scouts. He was the first scout that was way, way behind enemy lines, and he was a crack shot. He's an unbelievable shot. Remember, I was deer hunting with my dad, and we came out of the woods, and he had a 308 automatic, had 5 rounds in that thing. And 5 deer just ran, just full blast. And I heard bang, 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 and I'm raising my gun, and I heard bang, 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 bang. 5 shots, 5 deer went down before I got my gun up. And he was that kind of a guy, and never talked much about the war. But when I would ask him things, he would tell me various things, and like a simple thing like a chin-up. He would say, a chin-up is worthless. He says, try to climb over a wall with a chin-up. You got to have it this way.
Yeah.
Or having your arms wide apart so you get beautiful broad chest. He says, what can you do with it? And he says, I'm going to push you. You stop me. And he went to push me, put my hands out. He says, where are your hands? They're chest part. And so these little snippets and things he would tell me, only when I asked, kind of indicated there's something special beyond the norm. And so he took the Ballad of the Green Beret and Robin Moore's book, and I got to meet some of the characters that Robin Moore wrote about, when I was overseas.
So when you went to this advanced infantry training, because am I assuming right, and that was sort of the training course that sort of special forces and people were using at that time to prepare them, or
No,
it was something else?
I don't think SF knew about it. It was someone came up with the idea, and it was to train people to be commandos and special forces people, and it was a whole. They weren't necessarily high caliber people, because I used to throw knives a lot. I love throwing knives, and I would, at the end of the day, I would go out and practice my judo, and then I'd go throw my knives. And I would go out and throw my knives in the woods, and I had a certain spot. And all over the place, you'd find socks, mid socks. And inside of it, there would be kiwi shoe polish with the lid gone, and they would put that in, and they would be sniffing kiwi shoe polish. It was the first high, I guess.
Yeah.
And the woods was full of it.
Yeah.
It was just all over it. And it was like these derelicts and people,
This is
they didn't know what a sentence was.
Yeah.
But and then the cadre that was in is Camp Crockett. It was the name of it. If I didn't say it, the cadre were the graduates and honor graduates of NCO school. That was their first assignment to run us, and then they had the permanent staff, which were basically sadistic. The honor graduate would be given staff sergeant stripes when he got out, and the other one would be a buck sergeant, and that's who ran us. By the time I got through jump school, the word was that every single one of those cadre had been assigned to the 173rd Airborne and were already killed.
Wow.
So that's the fighting at that time.
Yeah.
But it was all designed to make them into commandos and stuff. And the top 10% of the class, or top 20%, would either go into H, instead of Charlie, 11 Charlie, it'd be 11H for the direct fire.
The hotels.
And 11C, which was the mortars, and they wound up with the mortars. And it was a disaster of sorts. I shouldn't even say that, but when they got you awake at 3 a.m. and rest you all day until 11 at night, you couldn't really digest,
It wasn't a learning
environment.
No.
So,
It was harassment.
so you went from this advanced infantry training, which are you saying that it wasn't as effective as they were trying?
Well,
to
I'm
make
sure. I'm sure it was, because you learned to growl when you ate. I mean, it was. You're just let's go kill them. Get them. So the product they were producing was good. You didn't necessarily need an awful lot of brains to charge a hill.
Yeah.
And so the product they were producing were good, and I'm sure there were many good people out of it. Many. I only noticed the ones that were sniffing kiwi.
Yeah. And so you went from that directly to airborne school?
Jump school, and it was the largest jump school in history. We had the normal jump school from Vietnam, and then the governor of Texas decided that none of his National Guard were going to be pencil pushers, and so he assigned the entire Texas National Guard to go to our jump school. So when it was 1,400 of us, so we were jumping C-141s and all that stuff, the big stuff, the scary airplanes at the beginning,
Yeah. And then after jump school, what was your next step?
That was special forces.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how did you, so was there a selection portion of that, or how did you end up in special forces? How did it come on your radar, and then how did you end up going?
Basically, reading the book, hearing the music, deciding I wanted it.
Yeah.
When I enlisted in 68, I just told the recruiter I want it in writing that I get a chance to be in special forces. I mean, you can't be guaranteed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you want the chance.
Yeah.
And so right after jump school, my orders, special forces, Fort Bragg.
And then once you got there, what was your introduction? What was the training like there?
It was good. It was harassment. I think it was to produce pressure. You learned everything that special forces does, except for your MOS degree, your specialty. But it was designed that intellectually, emotionally, physically, you had the material. Once you finish that, you would get the beret, but no flash on it.
Okay.
You didn't have to wear a baseball cap anymore. But that was essentially the final weeding out, other than if you failed your MOS.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It was very good.
So you basically started. You started with with kind of the essential patrolling, like the tactics side of Special Forces before you went on to your MOS.
Right.
And then what MOS did you go on to from there?
Well, and that's a different story too. Everybody there's 5 MOSs in Special Forces. So combo weapons, demolition, or engineering, medics, and 11F. 11F is operations and intelligence, but you had to be an E7 with 5 years in Special Forces in order to go to the class. But they apparently have lost a lot of our people in SOG. And so they opened it up one time, and they said that you could go in without being a high rank. And so the only thing was Adam Major came out and did a talk and an interview. And he said you had to have a minimum 130 IQ. You had to pass this course, and immediately you would be sent to and I recall him saying SOG. Other people say a specialized program or some other euphemism, but for some reason SOG stuck in my head. And then the other caveat that he said was that 85% of us would be dead in 3 months. So anyway, I did the statistics for Dale Hanson to live 1 year. If 85% die in 3 months, what number do I have to start with to end up with me? And it's a number approaching 4,000. 1 in 4,000 would live a year in SOG. I said, well, that's fine, I'll live.
Right.
So we volunteered, and there were 37 of us that went and made it.
It's amazing. And I mean, MACV-SOG had, I think their casualty rate was over 100%. Like everybody
100%.
in SOG was injured.
Yeah.
You
were guaranteed you're dead or wounded in a year. Yeah.
Dill, do you mind taking a step back and just describing, because not all our listeners will be familiar with SOG and the background, from its formation in '61, I think, with it was under Colby, right, who was station chief.
Yeah, well, Colby may have been. I forget some of the personalities in there. I think Colby was a part of it. SOG went by various names, euphemism. Studies and Observation Group is one that was changed to. It started as a Special Operations Group, and then they changed it to Studies and Observation Group, and then of course it was CNC, Command and Control. So as soon as the Era of Discovery came out, they would change the name. And I remember writing letters home telling them you have to change the name, because at one time we were Task Force 2 Alpha Echo, and so they kept changing the name, but CNC or FOB, Forward Operation Base.
But it was run essentially by the CIA, by the agency.
Yes, which is one of the reasons that General Abrams hated Special Forces, because we had a couple thousand Green Berets, and then we had our own army. We hired our own army, trained our own people, and the commanding general of all military people in Vietnam really had no authority over us. We gave him deference and saluted and all that, but our orders came from the CIA. We didn't get money or clothing or anything from the government, so we were on separate rations. And a lot of times we'd get captured guns, and we'd sell the guns or trade the guns for a case of steaks or something like that.
Did that ever cause you problems? That dual chain of command. Or did it seem to work quite effectively?
Yeah, I think our commanding staff, the colonels in charge of like CNC, probably filtered out a lot of that, so we didn't feel it, but we were aware of it. One of the things that Abrams in particular, who really was conventional, really disliked Special Forces, one of the very few...
really disliked?
Oh, he disliked us, yeah. Yeah, and one of the things he could do, he could assign us our officer staff. Now, a lot of our officers went through the ranks and so forth, and were great people. But he also could, in fact, the book I'm writing now, I'm covering Ed Zebrin's mission, and they assigned a Marine second lieutenant who had never been in combat. I'm sorry.
Never been in combat. I'm glancing at Dave, because just that phrase prepares us for the worst.
Right. And he had never been in combat, knew nothing about Special Forces, and sent him to take over one of our teams. And that was one of his
slap in the face.
Yes, yes. And I don't know if we'll get to it, but the arrest of Colonel Rowe was his the greatest chance he had to put his thumb on special forces, and he wanted us under his authority and command.
That's wild. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just need to give a quick shout out to our sponsors tonight. First off, hey everybody, you should cook. And if you're gonna cook, one of the hardest things about cooking is like you cook the same stuff over and over again. But you should check out HelloFresh. It's a great organization that basically, you go through, you pick out the types of foods you like. They have specialized menus. They send you the ingredients. They send you the recipes. It saves you a ton of money from ordering out. Gives you a lot of great ideas. I love it. Jack loves it. We love to cook. Take a bite out of summer with HelloFresh. From chef-crafted seasonal recipes to their new fresh and fit summer menu, HelloFresh brings flavor right to your door. Look, you'll never get bored. Featuring high-quality proteins, fresh produce, and plans for many lifestyles. It's no wonder why HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. Go to HelloFresh.com/TMouse50 and use code TMouse50 for 50% off plus shipping. Oh, yes, plus free shipping. I'm sorry, I keep on saying plus shipping, but it's plus free shipping. Check it out. Honestly, cooking at home will change your life, save you a ton of money, and using HelloFresh it's so much more convenient. It's more affordable than the grocery store. Check them out. You'll love it. And also ARP Vet Report. If you're a veteran or if you're interested in veteran affairs, our good friend Toby Hardin, who's been on the show a couple times, he's the chief editor, I believe, of the Vet Report. People like Justin Sapp have written for it, and it's not a rah-rah thing. There are a lot of really good feel-good stories on it. There's also information that is important to veterans. They have a lot of great articles like our hero, hometown hero, my hero. And then and now, which are kind of a cool story about veterans back in the day and what they're doing now. They don't spam you. They only send you their content. It's a great way to stay informed about the veteran community. And that's AARP. You don't even need an AARP membership like I do. And I'm probably... No, am I the only one? Okay. Everybody else is too young here for it.
No, I'm there.
But it's aarp.org/vet report. You don't need an AARP membership. Just check it out. You'll love it. And that's thanks to our sponsors. So Dale, you go through the special, you get the Fox program, the intelligence officer, or the intelligence, right. Not officer, but the intelligence billet. So special forces is special to begin with. Like, when did you know that you were going into something that was even, in the darker side of the black ops than just special forces?
Yeah, I'm not sure where all of that seeped in, but I certainly had maybe it was even from basic on, getting some of it. But Robert Moore, 100 men will test today, only 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I knew it would be a challenge, but who knew what the challenge was?
Right.
I thought, I used to have dreams. I thought, well, they're going to put 100 of us into a room, and the 3 standing are going to be it. Well, I'm going to be one of them.
Right.
But I knew there was something unique about it. I knew there was espionage and things and guerrilla warfare behind the scenes in any war, and I just assumed that they were the ones.
No, was there so you volunteered? Green Berets would volunteer for SOG. Was there a selection process beyond that, or was it basically OJT?
Well, it was very thorough. It was very good. It covered everything from European to the war that we were fighting. European in the sense that spy techniques and cutouts and fingerprinting and anything you'd have to do about setting up a spy network or anything like that was totally James Bond, And then the other aspect of it was the operations part of it. The officers were in charge of an A team, say, but it was the operations sergeant, your SOP sergeant, who ran it. And he would set up the programs. Yeah. Depending on what side I was working on, the intelligence or the operations.
Yeah.
So, and of course, the split team concept. It was designed 12 Green Berets, so that if you split up 6 and 6 for some reason, you would have, each side would have a medic and a demo and a weapons,
Right.
and so forth. And of course, you're cross-trained as well.
Now, were you given an option to go SOG, to go Special Forces or location, or were you just kind of put into the SOG pipeline?
I think when you volunteered to go 11F, that sealed your
Okay.
fate. Yep, you were dead.
Okay.
Oh, so that
Yeah, you were
that was the
Yeah.
branch.
Yeah,
that took you
bet.
there.
And then it actually was a little bit James Bondian after that, because after graduation, like in the James Bond movies, they had M and Q and all those guys and Mrs. Moneypenny. We had the same thing. They had Q, who invented everything. We had B, Mr. Baker, who invented almost probably half the things you've used in your war. Mr. Baker invented them. And then Mrs. Moneypenny was Mrs. A, Mrs. Alexander. And I would like to say that I walked into her office and I took my beret and I threw it and landed on the hat rack with the flash sticking out.
Right.
But it didn't work that way. But Sergeant DeLuca, and I'd love to have you talk about him down the line. In fact, it's a fascinating story. DeLuca was our first sergeant, and in fact, he scared the liver out of me once. We were going to do a parachute jump on. It was the first time I jumped the C-141. I don't know if you guys did that.
Yeah.
And they had JATO.
Still had it at jump school when I went through.
Yeah, it just screamed in your
away
ears
as
as half jet, And DeLuca was sitting across the aisle from me, and I'm getting ready to jump out of this plane. And anyway, he kind of just needling me for fun, And he says, Daryl, he says, you ever jump one of these before? And I said, no. He says, you be careful because of the JATO. It'll burn your chute off. He says, don't jump out of there. He says, just put your toe out and do a little hop. Geez, thanks. Now I can think about, I was always nervous jumping anyway, And I thought, great, now I can think about fire, But anyway, DeLuca at the end of 11F school, I said, hey, we're getting ready to go to Vietnam, SOG. But we haven't heard anything. It's been more than a week. He said, well, call Mrs. A. And he gave me her phone number. And I right away I thought Agatha Christie, a gray-haired lady with chopsticks in the bun in her ear and maybe a cat in her lap. And she's the one I'm talking to. And anyway, I said, is she an old lady? And DeLuca said, no, blonde, a real looker. and I called her. And he says, well, you guys really want to go? And I says, yeah, we've been waiting to go, And she says, I'll work on it. And so I called her the next day, and she says, I'm working on it. I called her the third day, and she recognizes my voice. Dale, they're done. You got your orders. You're on your way, and delay en route, and there we were. We're on the way. It's and you kind of know you're in for it because when you land and you get to Nha Trang, the headquarters of Special Forces, and you actually see a SOG veteran who's coming in there maybe to get his tooth fixed or something, And we saw one coming into the barracks. There's a place that's transient, He walks in there and he's got a long handlebar mustache. He looks like he's in another world, just staring ahead. And he wasn't strack either. I was always strack, But he was... Pants weren't very pressed or anything like that. Came in and he just wandered in, put his stuff on the bunk, and then we saw that red patch, the SOG patch, and it was like, it's not, the rumors aren't true. Someone does live through that, and his name was Kirschbaum, and those of us who were going to go to CCC, which is Khartoum, the CC North, Central, and South. Those of us who were going to go to Central, we were on the third lift. We had to wait an extra day. And there was just a few of us in there, and we looked at him, and Mike Buckland was another guy who went through with me, and Dennis Bingham, and Randy Ray, and all those guys died except Mike and I. And anyway, we saw him and saw the SOG patch, and his name was Kirschbaum. And just not just a legend, all the guys that were in SOG there were incredible people, Well, anyway, Mike Buckle winds up being on his recon team in a couple weeks, and he's on Kirschbaum's team, anyway, amazing stuff.
What was your mission, Dale? How was it briefed to you?
Yeah.
And, do you remember? And
yeah, Special Forces, of course, had many missions overseas. They had the A teams. I think there's about 30 of them, and each one had 12 Green Berets. They hired their own indigenous army, given an area, and their job was to keep the communists out of it. Then we had special projects, and then we had you guys call them reaction forces. We called them. Had different names for them.
Like Mike and Hatchet.
Mike Force,
right?
Mike and Hatchet Force.
Yeah.
In CNC, we called them Hatchet Force, and I think in the B teams, and of course they had A team, B team, C team, they called them Hatchet Forces, I think it was. And then we had SOG, and then we had mainly recon teams. And it'd be 1 or 2 Green Berets, sometimes 3. We'd hire our own people, train our own people, and then get our missions.
When you said hire your own people, those were the locals?
Yeah. People come in, look for work.
Yeah.
And we hire them off the street.
Wow.
A lot of times they fought with the French in Indochina in the 50s, or they worked with the Special Forces in another project, and we would vet them and train them and get their experience. And there was one I mentioned, it was in the book too, where we just did not take them. It was after 1-0 school, and half my team was dead or gone or whatever, and we needed some more people, and 4 Cambodians came in, and they looked like Montagnards. They were just stolid, tough, muscular people. They came in unsmiling, everything else, and they wanted work. Well, my Vietnamese in the team were terrified of them. And we interviewed them and all this stuff. Well, it turns out that their trip coming from Cambodia into Vietnam, they bumped into a bunch of Buddhist monks and killed them, decapitated them, and set all the monks down alongside the trail, each of them with his head, holding his head in his arms like that. And I thought, I don't think I want them on the team with me, especially behind me. And the Vietnamese felt that way. And so we turned some away.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you how you did the vetting. I mean, it's extraordinary. Now, with benefit looking back, biometrics and all this other stuff that we use, but the vetting you did was just down to gut feeling and talking to the locals.
I don't know to what extent we had a database. Somehow we would communicate, and we could put in a name, and we would say, anybody know this guy? And maybe an A team up the line would say, he worked for us on the A team. He was really good, reliable. But I don't know exactly how we got the information back and forth, but maybe through our S1.
But the system worked for you.
It worked. There were times I think they've had teams wiped out because of Viet Cong or whatever, that infiltration.
Yeah.
Now, in Special Forces, all across the board, not only did they use the Vietnamese or fight alongside the Vietnamese, but also the Montagnards, the Hmong, the Nungs, right? Like there were a lot of tribal, different tribal elements in those areas that.
Right. I had the only melting pot team, I think, for when I was in Recon for a while. I had Chinese and Vietnamese, and I think there was a Lao in there as well. But mostly they were one thing, And my Chinese that I had, and I think I mentioned in the book how I was really strong back then, and I had a couple of my Chinese were just really muscular. And they said, you Chinese man, we're going to get named for you. And they went in, they don't have a witch doctor, but somehow my name is Oriental, Hanson, And so they went and they found the warrior dynasty, and they found the Chinese character for Han, and then another one for Sun. And when I went into combat, we went as sterile, nothing to mark us as American or anything, but they would take magic marker, and on my back, above the rucksack, they would write in Chinese, Hanson Kambaya Chin, which means Hanson never die. And God would look down and he'd see that guy and he said, that's my guy. I'm going to take care of him.
Yeah.
They wouldn't let me go on the field. They said, no, we have to run.
Yeah.
But anyway, we had the Chinese. And then when I went into the companies, then it was Montagnards. And Montagnards I really loved too. Chinese struck me as very, very intelligent. strong, put together, intelligent, educated. In the Vietnamese, you don't want your daughter to marry one. Over there, I had good ones and I loved them, but
because the Vietnamese were running their own, trained by the original SOG guys for a while, didn't they? Run their own recon teams. The first, it was the observation group or something back in the early '60s. Were they no longer operating by the time that you were there?
I think they had various programs. Some continued on, like that was the Hamlet program or whatever. Yeah, that's one of them. And then some of them went by the wayside, which we'd be happy to talk about when we get to Colonel Rowe, because one of our programs basically are totally erased, essentially.
Really?
So, yeah.
So okay, so we'll go chronologically. So you show up to Command Control Central, and on a recon team. Now, you've been through a lot of training, but you're still a fresh-faced boot in some ways. Like you haven't been in combat.
Right.
A lot of these guys have. How do they work you up? Like, what kind of training do you do to get ready to be on a 2 or 3 man team and take out Indig? Who know a lot, really, right?
And essentially, you're the weak element for a little while.
Yeah.
It's interesting. When I came into CNC, Bob Howard, the most decorated man in history, was the first sergeant there. And S1 said, I said I wanted to get on recon. He says, well, go over there. I'll tell Bob you're there. And he through the phone. But anyway, Bob Howard met me and all this stuff, and we just hit it off for all the tours we were there. And he says, I got the team for you. And it was Norm Doney, who's kind of a legend in Special Forces also. And so Norm Doney took me, and he says, what do you want from me? Which is unique. I want you. What do you want? I says, I want your job.
What do you want from me?
Yeah. And I says, I want your job.
So the new guy.
I said, I want your job in 6 months. I want to be the 1-0.
Yeah.
I want to take the team, And he says, you will. And he while other people are enjoying things, he and I were working and doing things and doing IA drills and working with the team. And those, we called them Doney ladders. Those three, they're cables, 3 cables that go down that replace the rope ladder. Those 3 cables, and it has the little hollow tubing in between. We built the first ones in SOG, and the first ones used in Special Forces. Delta Force used them, and Doney was in Delta Force as opposed to Delta Project. I said it backwards.
Delta Project.
Yes,
the
okay.
original Delta.
It felt wrong.
Yeah.
But anyway, we made those on our weekends and stuff, and got to be the thing to go. So we practiced on that, and we had a great colonel in charge of our camp, Colonel Happ. And he went out and watched us and how we worked and why they worked so well and everything, and got all the 1-0s doing it. But anyway, he just hand taught me everything and just tutored me beginning to end, and worked me into the team immediately. And we did all the IA drills over and over and over again. And of course, you do them first on paper, and then you walk it through, and then ultimately do it through the jungle and all that.
That's a really interesting story, because you think about classically when the new guy, as you say, joins the unit, that's not the way he's received, but it sounds as though, there was no room in SOG for that kind of bullshit, right? Of, hey, newbie, we're going to put you through this in doc or anything. It was
there was no time for Hanson.
It was.
Yeah.
You wear that.
My life's gonna depend on when you right away. So I'm gonna teach you everything I know.
Yeah, you wear the beret, so you're totally qualified to do the work.
Yeah.
You simply have to know how we do things.
Right. Right.
And of course, a lot of people have to. You have to do it. You have to get it in jungle.
Yeah.
Because it's terrifying.
Yeah.
I don't mean jungle combat. It's terrifying, especially when you're sneaky peeing for a day, 2 days, or something, and you haven't even heard a twig speak, but and all of a sudden it's explosions and shells and all that. It's just, couldn't you be more quiet? Shoot quietly.
What was your first patrol like? And if that wasn't your first contact, what was your first contact like?
I think I mentioned it. Well, we had locals. and they weren't that big of a deal. You guys would exchange fire, that kind of a thing, or have them do the signal shots around you, things like that, or snapping the bamboo sticks, trying to drive you somewhere, or letting you know that you're there. We had that one that I wrote in the book, which was supposed to be just a local, and it we almost didn't get out of it. We didn't have any Hueys, so we had King Bee pilots with the H-34s, and the King Bees are an incredible bunch of people because they lived that helicopter. That's their life, year after year, and they inserted us and stuff. And Ben Het was just getting under siege, one of the A camps, one of the big sieges in Vietnam. The communists hit them with tanks and everything. Well, we were kind of looking for the enemy, looking for trails, base camps, things like that. And the communists were on us almost right away, and we were just evading them and all that stuff, one after the other. And we would come across trails as wide as your room here, wider than the couch, which a small truck could go down it, in which there's a blade of grass. It's been used so much. And I remember going on that trail to examine it, and there were footprints in it, and water was still seeping into the footprints. So they were just smack in front of us, and they were just filtering through the area one after the other. And they were chasing us and all that kind of thing, and having firefight after firefight. And then we knew we were cut off from any LZ, and we also knew that the communists would be covering every LZ. So we, the ladders, so called Bob Howard in camp, and we said, remember what we built. We need to have you come in with those. And so Bob Howard went out there with his people, and they assembled those ladders on the King Bees, and they came in. And the King Bees were not used to them either, because they had to be rolled up and so forth. And we barely got on that thing. And we were under fire, and the chopper was taken off, dragging the ladders through the trees.
Through the trees.
Yeah, almost pulling the chopper down. That's happened to me 3 or 4 times, where we would get tangled up, and you know good and well that somebody's going to cut you off with a knife, rather than pull down the chopper.
Now, was you were using the ladders? You guys didn't? Was this prior to like the skyhooks and the spy rigs and stuff like that, or was there a reason these ladders were better for you guys than
skyhooks?
Like the
penetrator.
Or I guess I'm thinking about the different types of rigging systems to get you guys out.
The skyhook can only take one person.
That's right. That's right.
And usually you catch a spy, and that was pre James Bond. That was something we had that probably Hollywood copied. And then the jungle penetrator, I don't remember us ever having access to it, but I know it was there because on one of our missions, when we found the artillery that was bombing Ben Het, and they called it that massive airstrike, Doc Paget told me that they used jungle penetrators to get through the jungle and get weaponry out and a wounded man out. So they existed, but I never saw them. We usually either landed or did the latter. And of course, reverse it to coming in. We'd rappel in. I never laddered in, but I rappelled in and landed in.
And how did that work? So you just jump on, they come in, hover, you jump on the ladder. How many of the? I mean, 2 or 3 of you.
Yeah.
And presumably the crew chief is signaling you. Got him, and then the pilot would just take off.
Kind of like with the rope ladder, you're best to do it on the end because they can't roll up on you. If you were wounded, the good thing on that is if you got so tired you couldn't go up any higher, just snap into one of the rungs, and they could roll up underneath you and almost be like a cot, which was really great. Yeah. So that was an excellent thing, But basically 2 or 3 at a time,
and
the rest of us would
designed, cover. I mean, it was the homemade thing, right?
Yeah. And on one of our missions, they have 3 those cables coming down. And I remember on one of them, I think it was the one I was just talking about, the fire was so intense that it was cutting through, and it cut through one of the 3 cords.
Oh, wow.
So it was pretty heavy fire.
Yeah, because so what we're talking about, for anybody not following is we are talking about extraction methods for troops on the ground, especially when they're in contact. And the helicopters, would not be able to land. And a lot of times it was because it was in the jungle. Other times it was simply because they were under fire. But and sometimes it was both. But the thing is that there were different types of extractions. But you're talking about having basically a ladder system that the guys would climb up, and then the helicopter can't just take off because the guys are still below the tree line. Right. So the helicopter actually has to go straight up while under fire. You guys are all under fire before it can start moving out.
Right. And that's the third time I was wounded because we were under tremendous fire and had 3 ropes coming down. One of the ropes was shot through and we were hanging on. 2 of the other guys were on the other link. I was already wounded. I couldn't tie the knot, but I snapped in. And then we started to go up. But the fire was so heavy, the pilot kind of panicked. Instead of clearing the trees, he went horizontal and drug us through the trees, and we tangled. And it almost pulled me in, too. My legs still go to sleep after all these years.
Yeah.
And banged through the trees and stuff. Then when we finally hung up, it was just one of those, good and well, they're going to cut the ropes, let you fall.
Right.
And it was just at that moment, I had my one good hand, rifle cradled like that, and cutting as fast as I could. And when it cut through, we sprang into the air like a bow and arrow. And then they took us to an A camp. Where we could get off the strings. And I remember he was almost out of fuel because it was a pretty horrendous battle. And flew us through a storm.
So you were cutting yourself loose from the entanglement from
I was,
the tree.
Yeah, cutting the limbs off.
Before the crew chief cut you.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
It wasn't cutting me off,
Yeah. So that was the third time you were wounded. I mean, so your first patrol, though, before you were ever wounded, your first patrol was just supposed to be a local thing. But one of the things we've talked with other veterans from MACV-SOG is that headquarters of MACV-SOG was compromised, right? That you guys were you guys were taking it to the enemy, large numbers of enemies, but almost any time you landed, they knew where you were because somewhere in the headquarters element, like in Vietnam, though, they had like Vietnamese and whomever officials who were feeding all this information to the Viet Cong and the NVA.
Right.
Were you guys? Do you remember being aware at that time or at any time when it came into your awareness?
Yeah, we had certain programs that we never told the Vietnamese for that very reason, moles and so forth. And again, with Colonel Rowe was one of the big examples. But a lot of times our programs and so forth, we would try to isolate from each other. But, the brotherhood is so strong.
Right.
I remember once those of us in CNC just decided to go down the street to the Mike Force, you call it Reaction Force, just to visit them. I see our other brothers, what they're doing and all that kind of a thing. And that was interesting, too, because the whole Mike Force was out fighting around Ben Het with the enemy and stuff. This guy that we were visiting is the only guy left. And he was wounded twice. And he was in there with a cook. And there were some people in the compound for guards. But he was the only one that was left. And we visited with him. And he took a round through the cheek. And I forget what the other one was. But rough times just visiting each other. I don't know if that answered that question or if
Yeah. So was that your first mission? Was that your first contact? What was that? Because firefights are generally very confusing to begin with.
Yes.
If you don't know exactly where the enemy is, it can be very confusing. You hear fire, you're not sure. I can only imagine what that's like in a jungle. What was that like for you, if you remember that?
Kind of like you say, usually you're totally involved. and usually you know the direction. So that answers a lot of questions. The second thing is your leader, your team leader, 1-0. It's kind of a philosophy I've got. It's like if you're the leader and you're under fire, either platoon or recon team or whatever it is, whatever the direction you're being fired, I always thought, well, the first thing is overcome, their fire as fast as you can, just full blast, full automatic and all that stuff. But your first thing as a leader, because the first one is reflex.
Right.
Yeah. Your first thing as a leader is get everybody doing the same thing at the same time. That can be the wrong decision. You can always change it.
Yeah.
But you need to keep team integrity. So I would just point to my point man. In this case, I would say Noy. His name is Noy. I'd say, Noy, there. And I give him a direction. And so he would go and the guys would follow and they would do our immediate action. But we had team integrity then.
Right.
And so that was my first job. And it's like your immediate action drill is the thing. First thing, overcome fire.
Right.
Then you go into your immediate action drill right away. And if you know it like a reflex, that helps you so much. But then after that, it's like, what is the situation here?
Right.
Am I being assaulted? Am I chased? How many of them are there? Do I turn around and assault them?
Right.
Or do I DD them out and get out of there?
Right.
So
for your immediate actions, like for you guys, first thing was to like achieve fire superiority, like get rounds going.
Yeah.
And then and then you guys are going to kind of assess the situation and determine what action needs to happen. I mean, how many training iterations do you have to go through with those guys in order to, because if you guys start taking fire and the guy in the back doesn't know where the fire is coming from, obviously he has to have a cool head, right, to see where the fire, you don't want people firing in a bunch of different directions, right?
Right.
But that happens.
And sometimes you don't want them to fire at all.
Right.
Flashes and stuff. Sometimes you only use like grenades. Because they don't know where it's coming from.
Right.
And they can be shooting the other way. And a lot of times, too, close by, you might have a toe pop or a mine that you left. And they fire it off, and they might be close enough that you could actually engage them. But it's better off, if you're recon, make some distance away from you and let them shoot all around themselves in the air, not knowing where you are at all. And then continue the mission, because you would like to continue the mission if you can. Otherwise, the first time you have in contact, you're gone. You're
right.
done. Take me home. I want to go my mama. So break contact, continue mission. As a matter of fact, Norm Doney, my team sergeant, by the salt and pepper shakers in the mess hall, had this sign on every single table. It says, "Take 2 salt tablets and drive on." And it's like, I remember talking to a medic, same thing. He'd say, my arm hurts when I do that. Well, don't do that.
Right, right.
Or I broke this arm. Well, you got 2 of them, don't you?
Yeah, the salt tabs became replaced by Motrin, but I think that kind of stayed in the military. We have a little guest here, a little spider coming down.
I noticed that, yeah.
So what?
Time to fumigate.
Don't eat that.
Yeah, exactly. So what was your progress with the recon team after like your first mission, and how did it go after that?
I think it was fine. It was fine. You wind up being satisfied with what you did, and Norm would critique. He's the guy who was not effusive with compliments. He said, "You didn't goof up too bad," Right. But he was the ultimate teacher. My lifetime friend from then on, the rest of my life. But he was an ultimate teacher, and I used to talk about adventure. He says, "Adventure is when you make a mistake." Good point.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a great phrase.
Yeah.
And things you're talking about are, I mean, you're making them sound easy, but everyone knows how extraordinarily difficult just fire discipline.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, your comment about knowing when to return fire, knowing when that is not, that's counter to the mission, and responding accordingly, because if you shoot, obviously it's too late to be told not to. Achieving that kind of discipline using cross culturally, not just among your guys, is quite. That's real leadership, right?
Yeah.
There probably wasn't a lot of yelling and screaming, but you guys
none of
got the
that.
job done.
Yeah, none of that. I never heard yelling from our people.
So
What
very,
was
very
it?
non-marine.
Well, well, even the Marines though, they had those very successful
Oh, absolutely,
captains. But like, how did that happen? Were there guys who showed up who just temperamentally weren't suited because of how they worked with the Indige or how they viewed them?
Yeah, I think most of our guys realize that we're here. This is our first tour, second tour, whatever it is. These guys have been here 15 years, and they've been fighting and all this kind of a thing. And this is their country, and they have to live here when we leave. And we have a lot to learn from them as well. One of my things I dislike about officers in particular is they feel they have to shout and all this kind of thing. And I'm in charge. I got to give the order. I never saw that. With our Indige, there was an expertise that was shared. They knew who the leadership was. For one thing, I got the paycheck. But they were very good, extremely good, very professional and all that kind of a thing. All they needed from me is direction, and they were my friends. I would be invited to their weddings, and if they get wounded, I would visit them in the hospital. Yeah, if they got killed, I would get some people, and we'd take a 3/4-ton truck and drive to the village and do condolences with the family and see the old man in the village and all that kind of a thing, and put them in the body bags, of course, and all that kind of a thing, But it was like another family away from home. In the book you've got there, I think it's in the second to the last chapter in there, was when I described leaving the country, and I think when I was reading the book, I almost started to cry because it was so hard for me to say goodbye. And when I was leaving at the gate, there was I shouldn't even tell you this because I might cry. But anyway, there's a 5-ton truck, and my people were on the bed of that truck, right, being taken to the airport or someplace to do a mission and stuff. And I could hear, Hanson, Hanson, Hanson. And they gave me a Montagnard bracelet, which I never took off. The only reason I don't have it now is it wore so thin. It was thinner than paper. It just fell off. But they said Hanson, Hanson, and they gave me their bracelet. But they didn't engrave it because they were several tribes. And they all had different tribal symbols. And anyway, to watch them and look at them, and Bia was one, B-I-E-H. We all called him Beer, of course, and he had napalm took off his upper lip, and he always had that sneer, shorter than most of them. But he was my shadow, and to say goodbye to Bia and the other ones, it was so hard for me.
Yeah.
And remember when they left the gate and went down the road, I watched them. I stood in the road and I watched them until they were just a tiny dot.
Yeah.
And then, as I said in the book, one of the guys must have seen what was happening, and he just went up and he says, "Time to go, Sergeant."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dale, we've talked about, the challenges, obviously, of operating against the enemy, but can you talk a little bit about just the challenges of operating in the jungle itself? I mean, you're from Minnesota. I mean, it didn't come naturally to you,
No,
right? I mean,
it
how
doesn't.
did you learn?
Yeah.
What were the things that you learned? What were the impressions that you had?
Hunting skills and so forth carried over.
Yeah.
Quietly, and when to put toe first and heel first, and a lot of times your point man would clear the way for you and stuff. But basically, listening and stopping. Often, we had sometimes we only could cover one click in a day, 1,000 meters in one whole day. Just going so slowly and so quietly and observing everything, And the crazy thing is you could be trying so hard, and it's hot and dry or whatever, rather than rainy, and it'll be hot and dry for a while, and then everything you touch was brittle and would break, and you're trying so hard to be quiet, and the grass would be loud against your pants, only to find out for the last 3-4 hours you've been following right alongside a high-speed trail in which there's absolutely no sound, no vegetation on it, and they could have heard you, and you're doing your best, but it's hard. The biggest thing is be going carefully, knowing exactly what's going on around you. And I think in that last mission I mentioned,
you're moving at day or at night or both?
Yeah.
Customarily.
If you moved at night, you had to move at night.
Yeah.
But you can't be that quiet. You don't know what you're going to bump into.
Right.
And there's a lot of parameters you got to watch for, like when to eat, when not to eat, when to communicate. We were so far behind lines, we were beyond radio range. So we had a radio relay site that occasionally, if you're not too far, they could hear you. Or a covey would come by in the bird dog, and he would go into the next valley or something.
I'm sorry, a covey.
A covey airplane.
Yep.
And it would check on us maybe morning and night.
And that was
it wouldn't fly directly over you, just maybe the next valley you could hear it. And you'd have a prepared message, and it was called a one-time pad. I don't know if you guys had that.
Yeah, the old, I've seen them.
Yeah, we had one-time pads. We made the code message, and you never did it in the RON. They were made overnight. And you had it all ready, and you could hear them, and you'd make contact. And it was such a thing that whoever was doing the radio would lay on the ground with a tarp over the head, and they wouldn't even whisper. It would be air. They would just air it, and it would be one-time code. You say who and so forth. ICAC, and then you would say the codes, and it would all be 5 letters and stuff. And it would be Team OK and all the stuff, and or one casualty or whatever it is, and give the signal, and then you move, because they might have radio direction finding and things like that. Never did it as you went into the RON, because they could find you and follow the RON, and you never ate in the RON because they could smell it maybe. So you did that stuff before you went in there.
How did you live? I mean, water, food, because we're talking, a lot of our listeners are like Dave and I, Afghanistan, Iraq, so, we got into kind of the luxury of
halls.
And so it's very interesting. For me and for listeners to think about.
Yeah,
I mean, there was a huge logistics burden that you didn't need, so you had to.
Yeah, in base camp we ate well. Steak on Sunday, or water buffalo, whichever it was, and we would make our own rations. That was Mr. Baker who invented all these things, and the kind where you carried it in your pocket, and then you put water in it, and you put it in your pocket, and it would be body temperature. And he invented those, and you would have them all pre-prepared before you went on the trip, and maybe an hour before you're going to eat, you put the water in and put it in your pocket, and then you would stop and squeeze it into your mouth all the time, watching and looking. And
so SOG had its own rations, and you weren't using them.
Yeah.
And water, was that customarily probably in the jungle wasn't?
Yeah, I carried only one canteen. And our unit was a little different. My recon team, it's the way I did it all the time, but I see all the movies and stuff, and I don't know how they could carry. To put it in perspective, I carried 600 rounds of ammunition, 600 rounds.
Of like 5.56 30-round magazines?
Yeah.
Wow.
600 rounds. But if you figure the cyclic rate of a CAR 15 is 850 rounds a minute, you got enough ammunition for 50 seconds.
Right.
Yeah. So you better be careful and carry lots of ammunition, especially if you're not going to get resupplied.
Yeah.
Because that'll tell the enemy where you're at.
Yeah.
But in order to carry them, I used canteen covers, and I had 6 canteen covers. We kept our back completely empty, so you never took your web gear off during a mission ever. And the front right, I could get 8. We take the liners out. I could get 8 grenades in that one, because Donnie, my team leader, didn't want grenades out like they do in Hollywood, because he says the communists could shoot at them.
Yeah.
Especially white phosphorus.
Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, 8 grenades. And then I had 3 of them where you laid 2 magazines down flat, and that raised the rest of them up a little bit. They had 7 or 8 upright, bullets out, shells down. And so we had that.
20 round.
Yeah. And
Max said that.
Yeah. Yeah, those had to be 20. Yeah. And then
That's a great story, though. I have to get
yeah, and then 1 canteen, and then the other one was the RT radio, which is a survival radio, and I think we had a couple other survival things in there. And that was attuned to every aircraft in Southeast Asia had that frequency. So when you hit that thing, everybody heard you.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you had the same.
Yeah, I think there are like emergency, like there are the I can't remember what they're called now, but
Yeah. But wait, I mean, what's funny about this? What's interesting is when you think in the 50 or so years since Dale was, it's longer than 50 years,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But since Dale's been doing this, how technology has leapt and leapt, you know, on communications.
Yeah.
That's why I find it's one of the things I find so fascinating, that what you and your guys were doing was essentially no different than, say, when you read about the Chindits in Burma.
Yes.
You know, I mean, you were much smaller teams, but
Yeah.
the principles, that the thing, and what you had available to you were pretty much the same.
Right. And I don't know if they've improved on the radio, but Prick 25 was 25 pounds.
oh yeah, they've
Yeah,
improved a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they've
That was heavy. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. You you mentioned your car 15 and how much it was interesting because you talked about carrying a Swedish K at first, and somebody turned you off to that.
Well, it was required.
Okay.
Yeah, because since we were over the fence,
Right.
in communist territory, and we were supposed to be in Laos or Cambodia or
Right.
North Vietnam, we were sterile, which meant had to have foreign weapons. So I carried a AK-47 once, and in the firefight, it was so hot, the oil sizzled, you know. And then I carried the Swedish K, which is a 36 round magazine, 9mm, and we had a silencer on the end of it, and then a heat plate because it would get hot too, and it was totally silenced. The only thing was is the bolt going back and forth. You could hear the bolt, but one of the sad things about it was the cycling rate was so slow that you could actually, full automatic, you could do an individual shot. So it would go pop, 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 instead of your AK, which is very fast, you know. And then John Plaster had a mission once, and he said that it wouldn't penetrate the leaves.
Right, the 9mm.
Yes,
Yeah.
9mm, yeah. And so he went to Colonel Lapp, and I was just ready to go on a mission with my Swedish K. And Colonel Lapp says, yes, I think the communists have captured enough of ours that ours are sterile now.
Enough of the car 15s.
Yeah. So that's okay.
Yeah.
So we switched to the car 15, which means reconfigure your gear.
Yeah.
And that you actually had a chance.
But the
with the
downside being the magazine capacity, right?
Yeah.
That you
Yeah. The first round.
Outmag.
Yeah. The
Right.
first round was a 30. And so we take the first round, we throw it down our shirt. You know, so that, after that, I could change magazines in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Nobody else could because I'm left-handed. And the M16 and a car 15 is designed for a right-handed person. And the magazine releases on that side.
Right.
You know, and the bolt retriever is on that side. Well, if you're left-handed and I'm strong enough, I didn't have to have the rifle leave my shoulder. This left hand could release the thing while I'm going for the new magazine, and I could throw it in, and then the magazine retriever is on the hand. So 2 seconds, and I'm up for bear again, you know, which was really good. So the first one's 30 round. After that sustained firefight, you're just going after magazines like one after the other.
Yeah.
And of course, you don't want full automatic unless you have to. You want to conserve because you got 50 seconds worth of ammo. You
And
know?
you're carrying everyone.
Yes.
So,
You talked about the Bright Line mission before you went to the 1-0 school. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I never got committed into the ground, but I was on them.
Yeah.
And we were ready to go a couple times, But Bright Light as a whole, we would take one A team, not an A team, one recon team, and they would do a week, and we'd trade off.
Okay.
And the point was is if you had a team in trouble, and you needed like a body, you had to get a body, or they need extra bodies, or they're not going to get out, something like that. We would be committed. So the choppers would come in, pick us up at Bright Light, and then we would get on the choppers. They would insert us right in the middle of the firefight to help them out, help them get out, whatever was needed at that time. And it was kind of interesting because it was Doc Toe. Yeah, Doc Toe, which was a 3-month, I think it was a 3-month battle. The communists really tried to take Doc Toe. And I think 4th Infantry was there and some other people. It was a real horrendous battle. Well, the place that we wound up was we had a little tower and 3 buildings. And one of those buildings was the mortuary. And that's where we stayed, and we had concrete floors. They all slanted to the middle where there was a drain, and the walls only went up halfway so that for smell they could just drop the tarp on the top, And that was where we were for the week. And it would be hot, and no showers and things like that. And you could monitor the radios and wait to be called.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And then, but do you know why they never called you for that battle, or why?
They would either get out, or no missing bodies or something like that.
Yeah.
So if they didn't need you, there's no point in putting you in.
Yeah.
But it was close a couple times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and so, you as soon as you showed up, you said you wanted to go to 1-0 school, and then you find yourself going to 1-0.
Yeah.
And what is 1-0 school, and what was that like?
Yeah. Usually when you went to 1-0 school, you figure, why do I need to go to 1-0 school? Because I've been in the field 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and I've been doing this, and some of them were actually 1-0s, but you were assigned to go there. I think regular people going into Vietnam had a different Recon School they went to. Yeah, and then the rest of us in CNC, we went to 1-0 school, which I think was 3 weeks, and it's very, very intense. Everything you needed to know about anything whatsoever. And then they had a mission at the end of it all. And it would be an all Green Beret mission, the only all Green Beret mission that I was ever on. And it was interesting.
And it wasn't like Robin Sage, it was like a legit mission.
It was a real thing, yeah. Yeah, and that's a story in its own. I don't have to say it long, but we did a mission for the Australians, and in their section, they had a section of Vietnam, and so they had a mole in their headquarters, and the Vietnamese seemed to know everything they were doing. So when we went to get our briefing for the mission, a 3/4 ton duck took us, and we went out of Long Ton. There's Long Ton and Long Thon. Long Ton is that gigantic battle the Australians had. Long Ton is where 1-0 school is. It's almost the same, not too far apart either. But we got into this 3/4 ton duck, and we went down all these abandoned roads and stuff, and kind of nervous country in a way. And then we went across some fields, and there in the middle of a bunch of trees on the edge of the fields was a big canvas tent, and the Australians had a secret headquarters in there. And so we went in there to be debriefed, and a major in the Australian Army swaggered in with a swagger stick, and he had it exactly horizontal under his arm, had that thin mustache, had the knee socks and the shorts, and I could have said, "You're Australian, aren't you?" and they have a hard time, along with the British, letting down, to be a human, But he says, "I think I've got one for you Yanks, this mission." But anyway, what it turned out is that the communists had so infiltrated it that the rubber companies had made a deal with the Viet Cong that if you don't bomb our rubber plantations, we'll turn the other way when you have your headquarters in the rubber plantations. So I had to deal with the communists. Well, the communist headquarters for that part of Vietnam was hidden in those rubber plantations. And this major wasn't having any of it. He wanted me to go find them. So I was the point man on that element. There were 5 of us. And I think it was a 3-day mission or something like that. And I never saw so many booby traps in my life. Just everywhere. You couldn't go anywhere without booby traps. Just you get the sunlight a certain way. Is that a spider web? No, it's a wire that's heading to an empty can with a grenade in it. Just everywhere. And it was really thick, and I was on my belly crawling. It was so thick, and got to this one spot. I just knew something was wrong, and I got to this one spot, and just inching my way forward, and I smelled the guy's breath. It was a Nook Mom. I don't know if you know what Nook Mom is. It's rice water, like soy sauce in a way.
Yeah, it's what they put with fish.
Yes.
Yeah, like the fish sauce.
When
Yeah.
they hang up the fish.
Yeah.
And
Very distinctive.
I smelled his breath, and I said, that guy is close. And I just didn't move until I knew where he was. And finally he moved, and I could see his shadow. And I knew right where he was, and it's kind of an ambush spot. But I don't think he knew I was there, you know. So anyway, I put my hand behind me and give the danger signal and all that stuff, and we slowly started back. And I believe in prayer, I do. And I there's no way I can go backwards as quietly as I went frontwards, close enough to smell somebody's breath and not have him hear me.
That is close.
Yeah, and I said, God, help me to not make any noise to cover our retreat. And no sooner did I say amen in my brain that a jet took off and flew right over our head. And it was time to turn around and tell the people, they had to go, and we slid out of there. And another story there too is...
So you slid out, and you slid out, went back, but then you knew...
and I just mark it down in my book. Okay, this is where they're covering things. And they were using the French roads and so forth. They do all of their, moving supplies and troops and things like that.
That's a really interesting story, because I've heard that we smell, of milk, of dairy products. I mean, Americans, Westerners, things we eat, deodorant, all this that other cultures can smell us.
There's another, lessons learned. Donnie was one of those guys that at the end of every mission you wrote down lessons learned, and the major said that there's only one caveat to that mission, is that apparently they lost a couple choppers, and their headquarters did not want to lose any more choppers, so they said we had to recon all the way around the LZ or they wouldn't come and get us.
That's crazy. Yeah, we've talked to other guys who have talked about, like, they could, a lot of times they could only rely on the King Bees,
exactly,
because a lot of American units just were not, they weren't going to do it.
They wanted to make us look bad. So anyway, they're going into this thing on going all around the LZ. I thought, this thing is such a big LZ over here that by the time I got all the way around it, enemy could move in where I just started, And it turned out it was an LZ that was shaped like an hourglass, had a narrow spot in the middle. And I thought, well, the logical thing, if this guy's worried about having a helicopter shot down, is for me to monitor the middle when I can see the two halves. And so I that's where I set up. Well, I never thought, and you probably would do it again anyway, but an enemy that needed to go on the other side isn't going to cross the middle of it. He's going to cross the narrow part, so he's not exposed in a danger area, and he went right across the top of me. And so I was ready to shoot, and we slid into the muck, and I gave my fingers, I said 5 seconds, and it was going like that. And
this was, so these guys were walking towards you.
I could see them coming because the sun was shining. I could see some reflections and stuff, but I could see that they had a point element, so they're disciplined. 8 or 9, 10 guys in the point element, and then the bigger unit behind that, maybe a company or more. So anyway, when the point element was getting to me, I knew I could take the point element. There's 8 or 10 of them, and I think 2 or 3 of them were Viet Cong, dressed in black. The other ones were NVA. The Viet Cong had their rifles over their shoulder, and the others had the guns out. So I was going to take out the NVA first, and then I would go to the Viet Cong. But when I had to, I was hoping they would go by. When I had to, I would open up on them and I'd take out the NVA first, and then go to the Viet Cong. And the same thing happened. I got my people. We slid into the muck and hoped, and it was the field was a little bit higher than the muck, so I could kind of peek up in the grass. And just about the time I was going to go like 3-2, plane went over, and covered that. Well, anyway, the point element took off running, and they ran past me, and then I could hear the other guys trampling the big bunch. And I thought, oh boy, this is a little bit more than I want to take, but you got no choice. And I already had my game plan. I'd empty my rifle out and I'd start tossing grenades over the lip so I wasn't exposed, and maybe I could take them out that way, And anyway, they all took off running. And I waited down there for about 5-6 minutes, and I peeked up above. There's nobody in sight. And then I wanted to make sure, and so we did a recon to where they were heading. And I found an empty leg full of rice, how they did that. And I think it was a magazine. And I kind of was laughing because here's some NVA going to a target without a magazine in his rifle.
Yeah.
But that's interesting because it's a lessons learned. You did what you think is the right thing.
Right.
You probably would do it again.
Right.
But it's also the thing that didn't turn out then.
Yeah. You talked about, like doing the full circle. And some of the people we've talked to, especially talking to Roger Lockshear, who was he was with the 101st. He was a door gunner and crew chief.
Oh yes, good man.
Yeah,
I like him.
But he talked about the problems that you guys would have with American pilots, where because you guys were really in the shit a lot of times, that outside of these guys like Lockshear and the others like him, and then the Vietnamese King B pilots. Did you have a bit of a contentious relationship with American air support?
Usually they showed up well. For one thing, we invited them for steak night. They got to be a part of our people. No contentions.
Okay.
Usually when the Vietnamese pilots came, it was when for some reason the Americans wouldn't, and they wanted to show us up. There's a good point on Mike Buckland mentioned at one time when he was coming from a mission about a pilot coming in and how rough we had it on the ground. He says that he was always amazed because when they came in to get us on the LZ was the most tense, dangerous, adrenaline-filled moment of their lives. But when we came out of the jungle to get on the plane, it was a sense of relief. Yeah, it's like it was what we had gone through was so much worse than the chopper coming in to get us.
Yeah, because they have to sit there, totally exposed, hovering, while they're just soaking in fire.
Yeah.
You guys were running a lot of cross-border operations, so I don't imagine you had a lot of interaction with like big army or the larger military.
Right.
But were there ever times when they were ever very beneficial to you guys or very detrimental to you guys?
We could use their artillery for support if they were close enough. We used that. Other than that, we really didn't have much. It's not that we ignored them or didn't like them. It's that we were just so busy with our own things, we would see them at the PX or something like that.
Yeah. And the rubber plantation thing you mentioned, that's kind of a big deal that really didn't get talked about much. The fact that DuPont and whoever else it was had these rubber plantations that the Americans agreed not to attack, and so the NVA set up full full camps in these things.
Right.
Was that you know, like if you guys, I don't know if this was ever, because you mentioned about for the Australians, how they wanted to go after this, but was that ever an issue for you guys personally outside of that?
About security LZ.
Yeah, no, not the LZ, but like the rubber plantations and stuff like that.
No, we were too far north.
Okay.
We were the hills, the Central Highlands, which was actually mountains and forest and stuff. Less jungle. We had it down low, but
Yeah.
it's a completely different environment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You also talk about Colonel Rialt.
Yes.
A bit in
Colonel
your book.
Rowe.
Yeah.
Rowe. I
Rowe.
think yeah.
Oh, okay. Colonel Rialt.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
sorry.
spelled Rowe.
Okay,
yeah.
Rowe. Okay, I apologize. Can we talk
Yeah.
about that now?
Yeah. The biggest thing is to get the backstory first.
Sure.
The thing. We had a project. We had many projects over there. One of them was called Gamma, Gamma. And of course, I minored in Greek. It's one of the Greek letters, Gamma. And it was kind of like SOG in a sense, because they had all these teams. They had recon, they had stay behind, they had the spies, all that kind of a thing. And it was mainly behind enemy lines and in denied areas and so forth. Project Gamma was really well done, and it was sponsored, of course, by the CIA. And at one point, they were responsible for 75% of all intelligence for all of Vietnam. That's how productive it was. But at some point, they got a mole in there, and they special forces kept it secret from the Vietnamese because of security. They just it was a productive, good program. But anyway, somehow they got a mole, and the guy turned out he was actually hiring. He was infiltrated so highly into Gamma that he was actually hiring people and sending them out on the missions and all that kind of a thing, only to have them betrayed, doubled, ambushed, captured. Entire units would be wiped out, or they would find an extremely lucrative target with all kinds of stuff in there, and then they would send in a company, only to find that hours before everything was taken away and moved, and there's a huge controversy, spy network that's involved. So anyway, CIA Special Forces finally got to the place that even though that was 75% of the intelligence, it wasn't worth the casualties, and so they canceled the program. Well, anyway, so the people went to various places, and then a line unit in Vietnam raided a Viet Cong unit, and it was a good mission. And they killed the people, they dispersed them, and they got into the headquarters building of it. And as they were going through, they found pictures of the guy who was doing all the buying, marketing, everything. They found the mole, and he was in the communist headquarters, being awarded, decorated, and he was a hero over there. They found out who he was. So anyway, Special Forces wanted to get him. They wanted to know how far the infiltration was and all that kind of a thing. But how do you get him back? So they invented a new program, like Gamma. Oh, we got this new program. So he comes by and he volunteers. He's going to help. And so as soon as he comes into the camp, they arrest him. And they give him sodium pentothal. They give him the polygraph tests. They ask him questions, all that stuff. They don't torture. We don't. As far as I know, I've never seen torture by an American. But anyway, he fails it all. And in anger, he says, "We are not going to help you Americans." And so now they got the problem, what to do with this guy. And they can't give him to the Vietnamese because they didn't tell the Vietnamese the program existed. And so the logical thing is to give him to the CIA. The CIA had a couple programs, and kind of like our special forces, they changed the name every once in a while. It was called Phoenix, Project Phoenix, and then it was called PRU, P-R-U, stood for Provisional Reconnaissance Unit. And the total job of that is to eliminate the fifth column. And 200 to 400 Vietnamese non-military were executed through the CIA. And the interesting thing is that us Green Berets would have been not entitled to POW status because we were sterile, you know, and so they, the same thing, for them, we were kind of a fifth column. We could have been executed as well. So anyway, we go to the CIA, whose job it is to get rid of these people. Well, the CIA doesn't want them because he already said he's not going to help us and work with us. So there's no value in him. So they said, we don't want him. So Special Forces says, well, what do you want us to do? He says, liquidate with extreme prejudice, of course. And of course, you know the three levels is liquidate with prejudice, liquidate with extreme prejudice. That means execute. Liquidate with prejudice is where you ruin the reputation, so he's ineffective, you know, that kind of thing. So Special Forces is tasked with killing this guy. So and I enjoyed writing it in the book because I kind of make it almost like Sherlock Holmes, because I got the guys in the wharf area, in the harbor and stuff, and they're going in the dead of night, and they're getting this guy with this inert body in a bag who's still alive, and you know, the weather-beaten windows and buildings and stuff, you know, and the rats running across the wharf, and a guy coughing in an empty building, you know, TB and stuff, and they get into a skiff in the harbor, and they go out to sea, and when they get to a certain place, they lift his body high enough into the, out of the gunnels of the boat, and they shoot him twice in the head with a high standard, I think it was. Shoot him twice in the head and kill him, put him back in the sack and dump him overboard to where the sharks are below, and end the story. But somehow Colonel Abrams, or General Abrams, hears it. And I don't know how he did. Probably the CIA did it. So Abrams goes to the CIA. The CIA throws us under the bus. Oh, the Green Berets got him. And so Abrams goes and he arrests the commanding officer of all Green Berets in Vietnam, be your counterpart in Cambodia, Iraq and Afghanistan. And so he arrests the colonel, the major, and 6 other guys. So he puts 8 of them in the stockade in Long Bin jail, and they're in connexes, 5 feet by 8 feet long, treated like criminals. And
Long Bin, by the way, it was notorious, wasn't it?
Okay.
It's where
okay, it's lived beyond its years. Yeah. So anyway, he's going to try him, and Colonel Abrams does not want him to go to the States, where the stories get out and where he gets a fair trial. He wants him hung right there, and he's going to put the foot on all special forces. I'm the boss.
He's going to hang him?
No, euphemistically.
Euphemistically.
At this stage.
Yeah, but he basically wants like a military tribunal there without.
Absolutely. You know, commit him to prison for a long time and all the guys and stuff. So anyway, we're incensed. Special Forces is really furious. And the irony is that Colonel Rowe had only been in charge for 2 months.
Right.
And his decision was made before he even got there. So anyway, we let the word out, and I helped on it. But we decided we were going to let Abrams had his little phony officers in our camp in S1 and so forth. And I saw a couple of us were talking in the back in the parade field, and I saw these 2 officers out having a smoke. And so I said loud enough that they could hear, but not loud enough that they would think I wanted them to hear, that we're ready to go spring Colonel Rowe out of jail. And I said that they've got 2,000 Montagnards ready out of the Mike Force, and I said all the recon teams are ready. And I said it's going to be hard to shoot another American. Don't know if they're going to shoot back at us, but we're going to go get them. And the word was out for quite a while. We're going to go get them. So the next day, those captains must have said something, because the word came out immediately that he was shipped to the States. Turns out it was a lie, you know, but that was the word that was let out. So we had no target to spring him.
But the fact that they believed that you were going to do that, just the illustration of Abrams. Yeah.
Which enters into our mission, last mission, where we got the information that exonerated him, because we proved that it was a spy that he got. So it's interesting stuff, you know.
It's fascinating, and it's it's fascinating how the information got to him. How the information got to him, but also wasn't conveyed that he was a spy and they had information, right?
Yeah.
And then why wasn't he open to, like, he didn't ask?
No.
Rowe and those
we
guys?
actually know the name of the guy, the Special Forces. I mean, the CIA head, the head of the CIA, threw us under the bus. Which is kind of crazy because we would kind of give them names for the fifth column, and we worked together, and we were actually payrolled. Just Special Forces is payrolled by the CIA.
You know what's disturbing about that story? I mean, I sit here and go, yeah, it's unbelievable. But at different times, different places, we've all seen that, right? We've seen guys with outsized egos, very, very envious and jealous of an organization that is doing good things for the same cause, but outside the purview of their control. And so instead of having a collaborative approach,
right,
it is resentment, and
you need all the tools.
Yeah.
And he's a conventional. The sad thing is the commander was a tanker in the war, and
famous one,
probably a Marine. No, and the mindset is conventional warfare.
Yeah.
Well, the whole point of Vietnam is that we wanted to have conventional warfare, and when we have asymmetrical warfare, and you're the other guy.
That's right. It undermines the platform that has brought him to everything that has brought him to this point in his career, and now this is a very different.
Yeah. Well, the other side has to use guerrilla warfare. Because on a conventional warfare, they would die. They know better than to beat us.
Right.
So they had the guerrilla warfare, which is why Special Forces had to spread out and have all the A camps and all of this. We were fighting guerrilla warfare.
Yeah.
And it was a mindset that he couldn't adjust to. And the communists did conventional warfare a few times. And I met once with the French at Dien Bien Phu. With General Yap, and this is a story, it doesn't fit perfectly with what we're talking other than a generality, but General Yap, the North Vietnamese general, thought that we have enough resources and stuff, we can surround the French at Dien Bien Phu and maybe win. The French thought, well, this is our opportunity because now they're all in one spot, we can wipe them out. And it didn't quite go. But here's the backstory that most people don't realize is that while this was going on, Korea was going on.
Yeah.
And so France begged the United States, don't sign an armistice because that will free up all the Chinese to go help them at Dien Bien Phu.
Right.
Yeah. And so what we did is we have no love for the French because of World War II and all this stuff. I mean, they didn't fight well. The Maquis was such a small percentage of the population, 1 in 10,000. So we deliberately signed the armistice for Korea, and 2 million Chinese went over to help General Yap.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, the timing. That's right. I hadn't thought of that because the armistice was signed, I forget what month, in 1953, and Dien Bien Phu, I mean, was simmering from 1953, but the culmination was 1954,
which freed them up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was the first one. Well, the communists, if they think they can win us conventionally, they'll do it. So it wasn't Ben Het yet. Wasn't quite Dak To. One of the other big sieges, and they thought they could do it. And so they surrounded us. They had the tanks, and of course, I know it's Khe Sanh. Khe Sanh, and they hit the Special Forces camps first with the tanks, and then it was Khe Sanh. Except it didn't turn out like they hoped. They kind of lost. So the next big one they wanted was Ben Het. They did it. They attacked many Special Forces camps, but the only way that they could get good press coverage is if they said a military base at such and such was overrun.
Yeah.
Right.
But if they say 12 Green Berets was overrun, it doesn't get the mileage. But Ben Het had a fire base as well, and so they thought that's the next big one. And the people that were fighting some of the other sieges went over to Ben Het. They were attacked in the morning with 10 tanks. And we told them the intelligence, our people, and they said, no, they have no tanks. And they said, you're hearing road building equipment, And so,
So ridiculous.
yeah, and so they got attacked by all these tanks and stuff. So a lot of things emerged on the basis of that. A lot of our missions and so forth. When we skipped over, but then we go to Colonel Rowe, and that mission, which is one mission later.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, that's I diverted with when we talked conventional.
Well, we're getting to
that was
the culmination of
the
your
general, and he
story.
can't think other than in that mindset of conventional warfare. So special forces doesn't fit into his matrix,
Right.
and so we were a nuisance. Get rid of those people. We want. And the other thing is that when you take the special forces people, you were taking the highest 10% of the intelligence, which is their officer corps.
Yeah.
Same thing with the Foreign
The
Legion.
resentment that you are, or even if it's not completely true, a sense that you're taking
Right.
from the same
Yeah.
pool and thus diminishing
Yeah.
it for them. We, in the Marine Corps, we certainly dealt with that when MACV-SOG was formed, and that was the resentment, was you taking all of our good guys.
Yeah. The French was the same thing. When their big military school, the top 10% went Foreign Legion.
Yeah,
The next
I see
10% went to the Airborne.
Yeah.
So they think that, well, if you didn't have those Green Berets around, we'd have some strong officers.
Instead of developing strong officers among the guys that he had. That's
Yeah.
right.
So what? So all that was going on. You guys, what happened after the Rowe incident? And
Well, that kind of went into our last mission. Before I went into the companies and the other stuff, Donnie was gone by then, and I was my roommate and Jim Morris. No, Joe Morris was gone. We had a strap hanger, Bobby Garcia, the three of us, and 4 Vietnamese. We went behind lines. The target name was Delta 50. Lima 50. I'm sorry, it's been many years. Lima 50 was the name of the target. So we were way behind lines, and it's pretty crazy because when we land, we infiltrate, get off the chopper. We'll get off that LZ, use the helicopter noise or something, get off that LZ because that's a danger area. They're going to come, and then sit and wait for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half hour. And see if we need to be picked up again, if they're right on us, So anyway, I had the radio then, and it was good. So we said, good day, sent off all the assets, and they went home, So we started moving, and within a half hour, they were on us. And we were in steady combat until the next afternoon when we got picked up. And we started getting moving, and I remember this one place, we were moving, and we were so quiet. I mean, you couldn't hear even a breath. It was just absolutely quiet. And we stopped, for how you do a listening stop or whatever. We stopped, and we had trackers right beside us. And I was back with my tail gunner Ba, and here in the length of the room, we had enemy trackers, and so we fired them up. We killed the first tracker, and Ba turns to me. He says, Hanson, him die. We think him die, and he says, but two man, and no can see, and we're looking. We know there's 2 of them there, and we can't find him. And then Bob Garcia comes running over there, and he's looking, and finally he sees his feet underneath some branches, so he fires them up with an M79 grenade launcher. Pops them, and then from that point on, they're on us. I mean, the brush is cracking. They're chasing us. They got dogs. They got for a day and a half, dogs barking and chasing us and all that stuff. And we had CS powder, and they would sprinkle that on our trail, and the dogs would sniff that, and they'd ruin them for a while at least, And then you could hear them online. Just online, trying to get us, But we were in a headquarters, and it got progressively worse after that, And we would, again, the leadership thing, get everybody doing the same thing at the same time. And Wordley just gave it a direction, and the point man heads that way, and we all go, and we break contact. And once you break contact, you maybe change direction again, and start maneuvering. They'll find you again. And it was like that over and over and over again. And then we got to a place where we had a trail crossing us. And all of a sudden, there's a whole bunch of people on the trail right in front of us. So we fire them up, and I don't know how many we killed, but I ran forward, and there were 3 of them right smack in front of me with their AKs. And so we're trading slugs, and I put 2 of them down, and guess what? Have to change magazines. I reach to change magazines, and the guy's got 10 more rounds. So he opens full automatic, and he gets me in the hand, and it blows my fingers off. Essentially, this one was just a piece of string holding it. I had it in the palm of my...
Your right hand. Oh, you're left-handed.
Yeah. So I wouldn't lose it, and it blew the fingers off, 10 nails off, and the ends of them. And it blew the knuckle out of this, and so, man, I'm trying to change magazines. I'm getting a finger stuck in between them, and it's flopping around, Finally, I get the magazine changed, and I had one of my Vietnamese, and I think there's 3 of us engaged him finally and put the 3rd guy down, And so Ken Worthley, another Minnesota guy, ran over and we put an ace bandage around my hand real quick. And I just had the tip of my little finger sticking out and the fingernails blowing backward, and my thumb, and that's how I had to fight the rest of the time. And again, you just break contact, and ambush your back trail.
And you're still off to your target at this point, right?
Well, the target is 10 meters or 10 clicks by 10 clicks. Not a specific thing. But it's just,
okay.
Yeah,
so this
looking for trails, bunkers, anything like that. Intelligence.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I thought this was.
Yes,
I don't want
and
to.
it is
Right.
too, because it winds up being sort of serendipitous. Because we're praying. Actually, several of us were Christians. We pray for Colonel Rowe and some justice to be done, and what can be done, and all that stuff, So anyway, we're fighting and all this stuff, and finally we get into an RON. And do the sit rep, and we said we're going to continue the mission. So I'm still wounded, and we're still going to continue this mission with my hand like it is. And we get into a RON position on the side of a hill, and I don't know to what extent you've experienced this in your war, but you could 3 or half a dozen of you guys spread out. The fight I'm fighting here is not the fight on the other end. You could be fighting a completely different thing. On my end, I could hear trucks. The Ho Chi Minh Trail's going right by. One of the forks is going by, and I can hear engines, and I can hear the tailgates and stuff, and I can see the lights, like the moon rising over the top of a hill, just slightly, And boy, they're lining up on us like crazy. There's hundreds of them at that time. At the end, they figured 2,000 trying to kill us, And so anyway, I'm trying to memorize the area, how it gets pitch black. If you move at all, everything's gone. You better stay just like that and memorize what's in front of you, And I thought it was kind of worthless, but I had 4 Claymore mines in front of me, and I had the clickers of 4 Claymore mines in front of me, and so I just had those where I could get to them. It's my hand touching them, had something solid underneath them, so I could blow all 4 of them, and that's 2.
But you're essentially one-handed at this point, right?
Yeah, the other one is there, but judicious use of it,
No.
And anyway. I'm hearing snapping. I hear it down on the road, and I can hear them snapping and stuff. And my man Buddha was it was Buddhist, and he always had this gold Buddha around his neck. And when things were really bad, boy, and he was pretty calm, but when it was really bad, boy, he'd take that Buddha and put it in his mouth. And if he got killed with Buddha in his mouth, he's going to heaven. He teased me about Christianity and, oh no, Buddha, him number 1. You think Jesus number 1? Buddha number 1. Look here, put him in his mouth, But anyway, he comes to me. He says, "Buku visi," and you can just hear your clothes, but I can hear him coming up the hill, and then I hear those dogs, and I let the other guy on the other side of me know, and so I'm here with my hands on those clickers. And I said, God, just plug the noses of those dogs, and that enemy force, I don't know how many hundreds there were, but they went right through my position, and the dogs never smelled us.
Wow.
And they just went right through us, And anyway, the next morning, we started trying to make out, to continue the mission. And as we're going down, we found another high-speed trail. We made up along the trail, and a bunch of NVA come down this trail. And we fired them up, killed everybody, actually killed every single one of them. But in front of me, there were 3 that went down. And I ran out on the side. Garcia and Ken Wordley ran up to me too. And my tail gunner, Bob, came running over. And he looked at them and he says, them not NVA, them Chinese. They're tall, haircuts, the whole kind of a thing. That stuff you're supposed to memorize when you're 11F, all the details. And they had a satchel, and in that satchel was wads of money. There was orders. There were lists of names, and I forget it was. It was a Tokarov pistol, and and there's 2 ID tags for GIs.
Bonanza.
Yeah. And it was an incredible.
Yeah.
They said it was the largest intelligence find of the Vietnam War by any small unit.
Wow.
It was a senior officer too, wasn't it? You'd killed a senior officer.
Yes, and there were 2 colonels, and they're the highest ranking people ever killed behind lines.
Did you ever find out if those ID tags for the U.S. soldiers were
No, we tried to find out too.
Yeah.
We didn't know. All we know is their ID tags shown up in Cambodia.
Right.
Yeah, and we went over there, and being 11F, we take everything we can for intelligence. So we took their stuff, his rifle, and we undressed them. And they're shooting us. The bullets are going like crazy, and there's rockets going off in the trees. We undress him. We take his pants. We take his shirt, his shoes, his rifle, a piece of hair, all that stuff. Because they will look at his gun. They'll look at that and they'll say that stock came out of Czechoslovakia. Yeah. The cotton that was grown for his clothes was grown here. It was textiled in this place. All the intelligence is there.
Right.
And it's funny the things you remember, but I remember undressing him, and he wasn't full of blood. He must have been just instant death. But I could see all the bullet holes. But when we would pull on the clothes, I could see the blood rise like a dowel rod. Didn't pour out. It just rose, a crazy looking thing. And then when the leg would go down, it would sink back in the hole. I thought, boy, I'm going to have nightmares about that. And so anyway, we get all this stuff, and they're after us big time, and then we make radio contact with FOB because we hear them. And there's no point in going to a one-time pad because they know where we're at, and they give instructions to an LZ, and we start making it for the LZ, and we are hit big time, and I go through 3 rifles. Mine gets shot in 2, and anyway, we just going through them like crazy, and ammunition and all that stuff.
But at this stage, are you the only one who's been wounded on the team?
Yeah, one of the Vietnamese was wounded slightly, and then I got wounded.
But you've been hit 3 times by this.
Yeah, if I count dragged through the trees as the time under fire, So then anyway, we start getting to the LZ, and they really hit us. Rockets, artillery, everything you can imagine. The B-40 rockets, they fire them into the trees, they explode in the trees, and the shrapnel comes down, And, of course, the small arms fire, they're just assaulting us like crazy. And Wordley said, cover the other end. So I ran down to the other end, and I'm firing. And it's interesting because the cubby rider was a guy who was shot 3 times with AKs. It's another story, and you're going to have to guide me back where it was because I'm old and I forget. But a guy I prayed for in combat, and he and his partner were in a life and death situation, and I was praying for him. And NVA came up with AK-47 and shot point blank, got him 3 times in the chest, got the other guy 3 times in the chest. And when we got him out, we saw him get out of the helicopter, no blood, and the guy standing up. And I looked at him and I was in shock. And he says, I know, Dale, it's your prayers. And he opened up his shirt, and the welts where the bullets went through the cloth stopped at his skin. The same thing where the other guy, and that one ended funny too, because I'm walking in dazed across the compound, And it was a really successful mission because the helicopter flew over. It probably wasn't 50, 75 feet high. And that helicopter did a victory roll. And I swear to you, a helicopter flying upside down.
Yeah.
You know.
Normally only does that once.
Yeah.
Make for a landing, you know. So anyway, we got
Wow.
these guys were on the LZ, and they're attacking us big time, you know. And I'm shooting down, and the Covey Rider I was just talking about, the guy who shot 3 times became a Covey Rider. He was the Covey Rider that day,
And for people who don't know, the Cubby is like a little small scout,
Yeah.
right, a little scout aircraft.
Yeah.
And it's just 2 guys, right, a pilot
Yeah.
and a co-pilot or
and
a rider.
they're the brains and,
Yeah.
and the director, they the stage director for everything, you know. So I'm on the other end. He told me, I went to scuba school after the war, and he was on the cadre, you know, and he said, Dale, that end when you were holding off the communists, he said you held off 3 platoons. So 120 people by myself. Well, anyway, went through one rifle, and then I grabbed the rifle that belonged to that colonel, and I was shooting with that one. And it's so interesting, but the smell of his breath, his sweat, and his mind, if you can believe this, his mind, I could smell the fear of that guy, whichever one it was, that pistol or rifle we got. And anyway, I was shooting at the enemy with that one, and someone shot at me from the side, and the bullet went between these 2 fingers of the good hand, went through the comb of the rifle and shot the rifle in half. It was kind of horrendous. So anyway, and then my guy Ba on the other end, and I'm looking around, and I think I'm the only guy alive. I don't see anybody. But then Ba, I hear, strange what you can hear over a firefight, but I hear Hanson, 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 and I look over there, and Ba's standing up there, and he's frantic. He says, Worthley, him die, Worthley, him die. So I ran over there, and Worthley was shot through the neck and died instantly. And we had the satchel and had dead 1-0. So anyway, I yelled at Ba. I says, get him out of here. And I was using sign language. You know, get the harness, put the harness, you know, his harness on, get him, and the chopper was coming in. I said, snap him into the harness, put the satchel down his neck. Yes, sir, yes, you know, and I ran off to my spot to hold off the enemy while they got out of there. And I figured they're the only ones. But then I hear Bob Garcia yell. And he's frantic. He runs over to me and he says, where's Ken? Where's Ken? Ken Wardley. And I says, he's dead. He got shot in the neck. He's dead. I sent him out. And then he's standing up in the middle of this firefight, and he starts screaming into the radio. He says, I want 500-pound bombs 50 meters out. And we've already got everything in the world. And they're all around us. And I don't know if you know if it's the same in Iraq, but in Vietnam, when you're in enemy country, if you're surrounded by them and you're starting to call in aircraft, they get close to you because they figure if they get so close, you don't dare use aircraft on them. Yeah. But anyway, he says, I want it 50 meters out. And I can hear the guy, you know, amid all the explosions and everything. I can hear him, what he's saying. And I can hear the pilot, crazy stuff. Anyway, he says, I can't tell 5 meters from 500 meters from up here. He says, I want it. And he starts swearing into the radio. He says, I want it 50 meters. I want 500 pounds. He says, I want it right now. That's an order. So they started dropping 500-pound bombs right on top of us. I mean, the trees were going down, the limbs were going down and everything. And then pretty soon I don't see him either. They're assaulting us. Later on, they said there was 2,000 of them on the LZ trying to get us. And I don't see him either. You know, so I'm thinking I'm the last guy alive. And I've tried to send all the team out, you know, and I'll stay down here. So anyway, all of a sudden I realized I'm all by myself, you know, and I don't have the radio because I was wounded. Someone else grabbed the radio. And so I thought, I got the survival radio. So I grabbed the survival radio. I have no idea who to talk to. You know, all I know is that when I push that button, everybody in the world hears it.
Right.
So I
Is that emergency transmission that goes out?
so being the professional that I was, I pushed the button. I says, "Is there anybody out there?" I want to know I'm not by myself.
Yeah.
Hear a human voice.
Yeah.
So
no kid.
how many had you already sent out at this point? Because I know you had your KIA, but
So 4.
Okay.
4, because Bob Garcia was actually there. He crouched down so he could call in airstrikes more. And then the other Vietnamese guy was Noi, I think it was, and he was still there and alive. And then I was on the other end, and then I heard the yelling at me. It was Dale, come quick! And the chopper was down. They threw down 3 ropes, and I watched one of the ropes get shot in half, and I watched it falling down like a snake. Oh man, this is busy stuff.
Very encouraging.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the other 2 hooked into the other line, and I went over there and I looked at that and I thought, I can't tie the knot. So anyway, I grabbed the little finger and I tied the biggest knot I could think of. And what do you call it when you overhand? Just one loop, and I stuck it in that snap link. And and I forgot one more thing. Then they assaulted, and I got shot in the back of the head. And so this time I'm shooting like crazy, and then I got in the back of the head, and I didn't pass out. I remember the sound was gah. And I go back there and I feel and I could feel shrapnel in the back there, and with the finger of the hand I pull like that, and the shrapnel comes out of my skull, and I'm alive, and I
Did
didn't
you
go
have
out.
a helmet on at the time to go through, or did you not?
No, I only wore a flap hat.
Yeah.
And now that you said that, I don't know if I even had it. Yeah.
So you managed to tie like just a basic
just an
knot.
overhand knot when you pull it through. That was it.
Yeah, and then
the other guys.
Was Bob already out, or was he?
He was already out with the body.
Okay.
And I had Noi, who was my point man, and Bob Garcia, who was very cool under pressure, did a wonderful job all the way through. He's a good man.
And you'd refer to him as a strap hanger.
Yeah,
earlier on. Is that because
I was the 1-0 when I came down to 1-0 school. I was a 1-0 team because Donnie, the team leader, went to be the first sergeant of Recon. He replaced Bob Howard, who went to get the Medal of Honor. And so I took the 1-0 slot, but it was with the idea that Ken Worthy was on extended leave. When he got back, he could have his team back. So he came back as the 1-0. I was the 1-1. And I didn't have lots. I had one mission with Ken Worthy, and I think he wanted somebody he knew well. And he went through combo school with Bob Garcia. So he strap hanged. So there was 3 Americans and 4 Vietnamese. So anyway, and then we hooked in, and the chopper was starting to take hits. And instead of clearing the trees, he drug us through the trees. And I almost got pulled in 2, and I was at the bottom, wrapped up in the trees and stuff.
Just
and
what you needed at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And I was hacking like a crazy for a long time. I my legs would go to sleep for just minutes.
Yeah.
And it just battered. John Plaster wrote a description of what my legs were like when I came out, and just the cloth was all torn, and you're black and blue, and all the nerves are torn and everything else. But then we take off, and they had spent so much time on the target that we were running out of fuel. So they took the most direct route, and I think it was Ben Het, but it might have been Doc. I think maybe Doc Peck, one of those 2. I think it's Doc Peck. We took a beeline to Doc Peck, but he couldn't. There was a storm, and he couldn't go around it because we didn't have enough fuel. So we went straight through that thing, and it's amazing. It was like steel balls hitting you. You're going 120 miles an hour. And,
yeah.
I landed down there, and Norm Doney was there to help me get, and Mike Buckland, bless his heart, all of his friends, and I'm wounded. Mike winds up getting wounded a few months later. But bless his heart, they flew there to meet me and get me off the strings. And then the other thing was since I was on a single rope, the other guys could hold on to each other. I was on a single rope, and it turned me around and around and around until it wouldn't go anymore, and then it would unwind. And I was so sick. I was so sick and dizzy and wounded. and of course the adrenaline
Yeah.
is in there.
How nervous were you like about that knot? Were you watching it the whole time?
I wasn't sure if it was going to hold.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it did. And it was, and another phenomenon. I don't know if other people have experienced it, but if you're using my water here, this is the bottom of the helicopter. You got a rope here and a rope here, and this is Hanson, and this is somebody else, and the chopper is going to bank for a turn. Hanson's rope is going to go down, and I think it broke. And I'm grabbing onto anything I can grab, like a vice.
Because all you feel is a sudden.
Yeah, because I can feel my rope
Yeah.
going down.
Yeah.
And I'm just assuming I'm going to fall 5,000 feet.
Yeah.
And I grab as high as I can, and I just hang on to that for life.
Yeah.
You know, in 45 minutes, I'm hanging under that thing. It's just, anything can go wrong, you know, crazy, you know.
Just think what an affirmation of faith, right? I mean, there must be a lot of people who saw what happened to you that day and thought, I want whatever he has. See me through.
And there,
I mean,
and there were a lot of
extraordinary
Christians
story.
there too. And I was in a firefight once with a guy, and he was so calm in his spirits. He went to a church in a little Protestant church in Anchorage. He was from, and we were about to be overrun by the communists, and that's when I was counting seconds when we were going to get up and fight, you know, and I was going like this, and I happened to look at him, and we were laying in some muck, and there's some water, and there's some pollywogs, little frogs swimming. He had a little stick, and he's playing with the pollywogs, waiting for me to say one. You know, 'cause I've never been that calm in my life, you know.
But it's contagious, isn't it? Calm is contagious, just like panic is contagious.
Yes. Yeah, you know, it's interesting, but someone can shout, and the next person can say something calmly and quietly, and it has more impact than the shout. Amazing.
Yeah.
Donnie, I never saw him raise his voice. I would talk to Bob Howard and never raise his voice. I've seen sometimes where he should have got the medal 4 or 5 times, you know, and he would get a bronze. I was there one time where our camp was under fire, and you do stupid things even when you've been in the around for a while. But they were hitting more of the city, and they were starting to come into our camp. And so I stood on the wall trying to see where the flash was, where he was shooting. And Bob Howard, you know, most decorated man in American history, he walks up, and so he doesn't embarrass me. He just quietly says, "Sergeant Hanson, get off that wall." And he could have screamed it.
Yeah.
But he saved my dignity. He was, and it wasn't an order. It was an observation that I should have noticed. And I jumped right off that wall, and then just, you know, a calm. So many heroes I've known, and they're calm in what they're doing.
I've heard, you know, real courage described as grace under pressure.
That's
and I really like that.
That is.
I really like it.
That's precisely
so
what that
true.
is. Yeah.
You mentioned that, you know, well, first off, I'll ask you, did you get a Valor Award for that particular mission?
I got a bronze.
Okay.
I if we were in any other unit, we would have got high medals.
And that's one of my, you know, one of my questions to you is that MACV-SOG was they were put in such horrible situations. And I don't mean you guys went into because of your missions, but because a lot of times of the compromise already, like you guys, for most of the operations that MACV-SOG went on, you were under fire almost from the time you got on the ground. And you're still like, yes, we're under fire, but our mission is not over.
Right.
So let's run these guys around for 2 or 3 days while we accomplish our mission. Right. And, you know, and the thing is do you think that because every mission and every member of MACV-SOG was unending acts of uncommon valor, that basically they just didn't give you guys medals because it's like, we can't give them all medals all the time.
And you can say, who's a commanding officer before Abrams. It starts with S. Westmoreland. Westmoreland came to visit our camp one time, and he said every single person in SOG who gets on that helicopter should get a Silver Star. That's how dangerous the weapons, the missions were. And I'm writing up on Ed Zebrin's mission, and I've got a copy of a letter from I think it's General Singlab, who was writing the awards people. He says, I realize that you are not giving medals to Special Forces until the other units catch up. And I've also heard high-ranking people who don't think the rest of us have heard it, but in their hearing. But I also heard some of those people say that could be a Silver Star, but that's what they do.
Right.
Yeah. In other words, like we're made of different things. We don't have blood, and I got nervous every time when someone gave me a mission. It was like electricity shot through me, and it was that initial thing. It's like jumping out of the plane when they say stand up. You get that. I don't know if you guys do it, but that adrenaline that goes through you and the dread. But you take care of it. And I think that's part of courage is doing things when you're afraid. Grace under pressure, as you said.
Yes, I'm
courage under pressure. Yeah.
I'm always fascinated by that, the reactions of people, how they manage their own fear, but how they not just manage their own fear, but act in such a way that it manages the fear of others. And as you pointed out, it isn't necessarily by yelling lots of instructions. Sometimes it's just by example, or the quiet word. And something you guys were talking about reminds me of, and I can't remember who told me the story, but it was a guy who was on SOG, who was with SOG, and then he went to a conventional unit, or maybe it was a Green Beret unit, and he got a Silver Star, and his former SOG buddies were ragging him, saying, "What the hell did you do?" And he said, "Remember those days we had at SOG? I had one of those days, but I was with a different unit."
Yeah.
So
we didn't get our medals. Yeah. And I know from some of the subsequent wars that we've been in, medals were awarded to the units to be given out before they even had the missions.
Yeah.
Not Special Forces, but other wars where, and it was always that the officer in charge got one higher than his people.
The officer is gonna
and it's like
a John Kerry Silver Star.
Yeah.
There are many of them that really deserve the medals, but it's so phony. A guy gets a bronze for achievement or bronze for something. No, the first thing on my mind, were you an officer? Yeah, of course you did.
And and what's odd to me about it, and I appreciate like the government, whomever it is, trying to go back and relook at Vietnam, relook at at events that happen, even in Afghanistan, Iraq, and say, look, this person should have gotten a higher medal. Let's put them in. But especially for Vietnam, and when we go back further, like a lot of times that they do that, it's like the person has already passed, and it's sort of like it doesn't cost anybody any money. It doesn't take anything out of their pocket to put somebody in for something. Like it doesn't cost an officer a single penny to write up one of somebody in his command for something that is. And look, there are a lot of good officers who do that.
Yeah.
But then there are a lot, and like you said, the officers will usually get one medal up. A lot of times, regardless for the contribution. It's just a really weird thing we have in our country, in our military, how we award those.
It's almost like the Germans with the Iron Cross. They had the Iron Cross, the Iron Cross first, and all that stuff. Yeah. Then you had the Knight's Cross. And the Knight's Cross with blades, and then diamonds. You had to be an officer to get higher than a Iron Cross.
Right.
Yeah. So all those really high medals, they're officers. This isn't to disparage officers, but it is an observation.
I mean, some officers could use a little disparaging. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, it's a really unfortunate thing, and like hearing about time and time again about MACV-SOG and the operations that you did and the conditions that you did them under. And the fact that it's like, well, if you were in the 101st, or if you were in another unit, yes, what you did that day, absolutely Silver Star at the bare minimum, at a bare minimum, you know, and on up.
Yeah.
But because you're in that unit and you guys do that every day, you know.
Yeah. Well, even a simple thing like when I sent the team out and I went off to the edge to hold them off while they got out, leaving myself on the ground. I think
Right.
I was the only one there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
In another unit, that would have been something.
You know, I wonder though how important it should be or is. Right, I'm playing devil's advocate here. I know I know you're going to get all kinds of hate mail for saying that, but I think we get, you know, ever since Napoleon said I can get a man to do anything for a piece of ribbon on his chest, I think it's too slavishly we get caught up in this whole medal thing. I've seen the most absurd behavior, even the combat action ribbon. I'd like to see all medals thrown out the window.
Well,
and everyone knows what they did at the end of the day, right? And the most important thing you have is your rep.
Well, like you said, you're going to get a lot of letters.
I will.
So I don't necessarily. First off, I don't think that people who win awards generally are trying to win an award when they do what they do.
Not everyone, but I have seen the lure of awards drive ridiculous behavior. Not in a profession, not like on the tippy edge of the spear, like where you were. There's no time for that shit. But in other units, soft or conventional, I've seen, and it doesn't matter. Officers too. Tie themselves into knots about who got what and awards. And maybe I've just had a very jaded opinion. I can tell that, you know, I know that what I'm saying flies in the face of what we're brought up to kind of, we always look at a guy's chest, right? And I just think it's such horseshit. And we all know, you know, think about it. I mean, my daughter's christening, all right? And the Marine Corps kind of prides itself on being parsimonious about awards, but we still hand shit out. My daughter's christening, I've got chest full of, you know, ribbons. And my father, you know, Second World War veteran, and a lot of his, you know, this is a while ago. You know, my daughter's 30 now, but they're still alive, and they're all there at the christening. And they're all like, "What did you do?" You know, and I'm starting to get just blush because I'm thinking. Oh my God!
On the other hand, like my father went, you know, did the entire Pacific War, and did all those things.
Probably
Never got
medals.
Never got anything.
Right.
Just he's got the campaign medals, and that's it. Yeah.
And he, my brother looked up a bunch of things and found out that he deserved two Bronze Stars. Never even gave it to him.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, you know, it's recognition, but on the other hand, too, is the people who I think are most
who matter, the people who matter.
Yes,
like your
exactly
father not having
going.
a Bronze Star didn't change one iota what you felt about him.
Yeah,
or his
it gives you a
him.
credential.
Yeah.
In life and some things, but it was it. What was the expression in Special Forces? Oh, and it was a campaign poster to get you to join Special Forces back in the '60s. I saw it on the wall. It was a very calm picture of a Green Beret, and it was not bright colors. And all it said was, "It says more about you than you'd ever say about yourself."
Yeah.
You know, and I thought that was so powerful. And a lot of you can't say, "Oh, I got these medals, I got this, I did that," because you come across as often as not as a blowhard.
Yeah.
You know,
I definitely feel though like the Medal of Honor should. I mean, I can see your
Certainly.
discussion with like other medals. You know,
Medal of
these.
Honor, absolutely.
But the Medal of Honor is, you know, it's one of those things where, when given, and not every Medal of Honor has been given appropriately, and not everybody who deserves one has gotten one, obviously. But it is one of those awards, I think, where, you know, when somebody has truly done something absolutely selfless.
I had a dream once that, and it was kind of interesting. It had to do with a guy who falls on the grenade and is killed, and he gets the Medal of Honor. And then another guy falls on a grenade and it's a dud. And
It's a
people
dud?
aren't nervous and they laugh. but it's the same heroism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
There's actually it's interesting you should say that. There's actually there was a case in Afghanistan where someone was written up for an award for trapping a grenade. Did you hear about this?
No.
Trapping a grenade with his helmet, and it was kind of set up between him and his buddies.
Oh.
Anyway, I'm taking this, but that's my whole point. This lure of awards. I agree with you. The major awards should be there, but all this other trash, to include the combat action ribbon, to include the combat infantry badge, is all absolute horseshit, and it encourages bad behavior. Not bad behavior. It encourages just the wrong mindset. Okay. This is my last appearance, I think, on this show.
No,
But I do.
Listen,
as I've seen people who do things, and you can say, well, yeah, if you either have integrity or you don't. But case in point, I think that you get a lot of people who are very impressionable, who want to impress other people by getting.
Were they all officers?
No, come on. Just kidding. You and Jack. Listen, I started as a private.
I know. I'm just.
It was only because the promotion system broke down that I was commissioned in the first place.
So was this your last combat op?
No.
Okay.
I spent 5 months hospitals and convalescent leave.
Okay.
Then I came back for 2 more tours. Yeah.
So you went 5 months, and then did you come back to Recon, or did you go?
Yeah,
where did you go?
Initially, I was going to go back to Recon. My friend Mike Buckland met me, and he was saying, I think it was almost the day I got there, the last of our class, other than he and I, was killed. And I was on my way to get back on the Recon team, and he says, I don't think you should go right now. And we took an awful lot of our own people casualties and stuff. They were filling in some of the ranks, 75th Rangers, I'm sorry, which are fine. They're great. They're courageous and all that kind of a thing. But they haven't been trained in SF. Mm-hmm. They don't know SOG. Mm-hmm. And I later on, I was debriefing them all because I was in intelligence. And they would go out on a mission, and they would get in a firefight right away. And then they would get pulled out. They come in, they read each other up, and they had no idea what they were sent for. Mm-hmm. And Vietnamization was going strong. It was pretty clearly, we weren't trying to win. I was in 2 Corps, Vietnam. There was 4 Corps. And I was in 2 Corps, which is Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and I think. Almost all the American units were gone. 4th Infantry was pulling out. And
what year was this, Dale?
That would have been 70.
Yeah.
So
sliding down.
But anyway, long and short was I agreed to set aside for a little bit. And so I went into intelligence. Mm-hmm. At S2, Tailwind is a famous mission. I did the intelligence briefing for some of them, and some of my good friends were on Tailwind, a great mission. And then was doing that for quite a while. And my help from being 11F and from Norm Doney looking for details, I think maybe a good briefer and debriefer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How to take somebody who's coming in from the field, who's tired, he's exhausted, may have slight wounds, may have just barely made it. Adrenaline has just exhausted him, and say, look, I need to debrief you while it's still fresh and usable. And I'll say, how long do you need to get things ready, to take care of your team? Because when you get back, the first thing is take care of your team, and maybe prepare for the camp getting hit or something, and I say, how about 2 hours? Will that be fine? Then come in and then just draw things he forgot. Did he realize that he saw?
With your background and experience, I imagine you made you a perfect debriefer.
I think so.
I mean, why don't you've got rapport, right off the bat, which is
Yeah.
a key part of debriefing.
Yeah.
You don't have to establish it.
Yeah.
You've got credibility.
Yeah. So I did that for quite a while, and then went to Fort Drum, which nobody's ever heard of before, but it was one of our top secret projects, and very small. And as far as I know, only CNC Central, CCC, did it. I don't think North or South did it, but it was essentially like a covey, but a little bit more dangerous. We would do it with two planes. There would be one in a pilot, and then a special forces guy in the back seat. And the one plane would be 5,000 feet, the other right at the trees. And they would direct you. Wow. Sometimes you tip the wings to get between the trees. And if you were looking down and you saw the NVA below you and they looked up, it could be you could recognize who he was if he was a relative that close. It's pretty hairy stuff. And the way I got into it was I was halfway happy debriefing, except I felt really guilty for not being in the field. But that morning, there was Mike Buckland, Ted Buzzerick, me, a couple other people that did only half a dozen special forces. But our job was essentially doing what a recon team does, behind enemy lines, checking bomb damage reports, looking for new roads, underwater water bridges, everything, troop movements, artillery, anything. And that morning, a sergeant who had never flown one before, sergeant first class, who got assigned to us and really didn't know much about SOG. I think he was Special Forces, but came in and thought, and I think Mike Buckland was going to take the mission. And it was a hot mission, and he says, well, I'm going to take it. And Mike says, it's a real dangerous one. He says, you don't want to do this on your first mission. He says, well, I wear the stripes, I'm going to do it. So he went out on it, and he found good stuff. He went back to look twice, and that's the kiss of death. Mm-hmm. Because when you go back the second time, you're dead.
Right.
And so he got shot through the head in the back seat. And I remember the major was in charge of S2. He came back in, and of course it's sterile. So he had his dog tags on top of his Cupidol lamp, and he just goes in and he picks up the dog tags off the lamp, and he goes into his office, and he comes out and said he was killed. So I went in and after thinking or not thinking, depending on how you look at it, I just went in and I said, I'll take his place. And so that's how I became a bird dog guy. And the pilots who flew it...
Literally a dead man's shoes. Literally a dead man's shoes.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. And the guys who flew us were Army, and they called their unit the Headhunters. And so in my chapter in my book, I called it Months with the Headhunters. And it was good. It was interesting. It was hairy. I wasn't very good at it for a while because being the bottom plane, which is where I enjoyed it, I had the car 15 out with one hand and the camera with the automatic click, 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 click on the other. And I was just sicker than a dog because we were going like this between trees and all this stuff, and I was learning how to puke in a bird dog, Started puking out the window, and the wind, throws it back in, and trying to puke in a bag and throw the bag out while that bag comes in. And finally, I got to where I was worth something, I think. But I did that for a while, and it was good. It was worthwhile, and a lot of our missions obviated the necessity of sending in a recon team on the ground. And it was interesting. You could find, you could see a shine there, and it would say, well, that's an artillery piece. Or another shine said, that's sun on the windshield. Or and then you see another one, and then you see another one down the line. You say, well, let's put a line between them. That might be a road. And you say, well, there's a stream up there. Let's go check the stream. No bridges. So you look and look, and all of a sudden you notice it's a different color down there. It's an underwater bridge, and you find all these interesting things,
It's fascinating. Now, did you? I imagine though, when you were taking these pictures and you mentioned the shine, You probably had some pretty hot like imagery analysts that really could pick this stuff out, right?
Especially a BDA, Bob Damage Assessment. You go through there and like an arc light is what the code name for B-52 was. An arc light would come through and it would level everything on ground level, be gone. But all the trenches and bunkers where they were are still there. And you're doing the Bob Damage Assessment, but the NVA are curious what happened too, and they're over there. And if you're careful and look, you'll find them out there looking up, and they're doing the same thing. And you can bring your pictures in, and they're going to find a leg stuck in the top of a tree, or something like that, and bodies or things that were left standing, or a before picture, which was a warehouse, and now there's nothing in it, and really telling intelligence, and the guys would have stereoscopic, not just a magnifying glass, but a stereoscopic thing, and all the things pop out in 3 dimension. Pretty interesting.
I mean, it's amazing, isn't it, when you think, all the technical means that we have now. What you're talking about is a little bit of technical stuff, but it's really, it's the human eyeball trained, right, to pick out certain things. I mean, it's a very, I don't want to use the term primitive, but when we talk about, think about all the things we use now and rely on ISR. I mean, things that weren't even in service when we came in.
Right.
It's reconnaissance. Reconnaissance has what reconnaissance means. May be the same thing, but the methodology has changed almost beyond recognition. The way you were doing it, Dale, aside from the fact you're on an aircraft, aside the fact you had a camera in the hand, but a lot of the basics hadn't changed since, Second World War or before, right?
Yeah, all the way back to Robert E. Lee when.
That's right.
Yeah, what was the cavalry man who went off and he went too far north and Gettysburg was going on and he says, "You were my eyes and ears, you're my intelligence."
Killer Angels. Yeah, I'm trying to think. We were going to get calling in now. How can you forget that? How can I forget that?
Yeah. How can you forget him?
Well, I'm British. I'm not American, so I didn't grow up with this shit.
So with how long did you spend in that project?
Jeb Stewart.
Just a few months.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I wanted to get on the ground again, so I joined the companies.
Okay.
So it was just what you call reaction. Yeah, and we spike team, reaction team, Mike Force, it's whatever the name is. So I forget what we called it back then, though. But anyway, that was very interesting. When Tailwind hit, there was a company. There were 16 Americans with that company. When I was in this company, there were 3 of us, and when we went on this one mission, we added 2. But as it was, I went in, got accepted into the company. Went in there, and there was a first sergeant. Each of us would take one platoon. So I had a platoon. The first sergeant would have a platoon. The captain would have a platoon. So I went in and I met the first sergeant. That was his 12th year in Special Forces in Vietnam. So he was there right at the end of the French, stayed there the whole time. He was in the black pajama bunch where they would go in, set up an army. They'd sit there for 6 months, and he was one of these guys that everything can work. And he made everything work, and he wouldn't get excited about anything. But at the end of the training day, he would go to the bar and he'd sit on one stool until the next morning. And then we had a captain who was in the German, kind of like their special forces, I forget what you call it. And he represented them in the Olympics and all that stuff, and the biathlon and all that. And he went into the American Army, and a very sharp guy. And this company was his war machine. And he didn't think we needed more than Sergeant Hanson and he and the other first sergeant, you know. And he kept telling me, "You're missing Vit by Vor machine," you know. And as I discovered, just on one of our small missions and stuff, I was getting the mail for the three of us at the post office. And I picked up the mail, and there was a letter for him. But as I was picking it up, it looked like my grandma's German writing. The Hecker side of the family is German. And it looked just like my grandma's writing. And I was looking, and it was addressed to the captain from Otto Scorzini.
Really?
Yes. And it was one of many of them.
He was still alive at that stage, huh?
I think he died.
Yeah.
Incredible guy. But Otto Scorzini wrote him many letters, and Otto Scorzini was considered the Scarlet Pimpernel of World War II, the #1 commando of the entire war, Hitler's right-hand man, although I think he was for Germany rather than Nazism. He's the one, he got 2 Iron Crosses. They got the Knight's Cross in Russia, got wounded too bad. He had to come out. He parachuted into Holland. He attacking those bridges. He's the one who in Normandy, his people were the ones that turned around the road signs and impersonated Americans. Yeah. He made a hit. He's supposed to do a hit to kill Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill when they met. I forget where that place was.
Yalta.
And they found out about him, so they canceled the meeting. And then he assassinated Winston Churchill, only to find out it was his double. But he got him. And then he after the war, he went into, I forget the country, I think it was Spain. And he went into Spain, and then the Mossad, Israeli intelligence, came up to him. And he thought they were an Israeli hit squad because of Hitler killing the Jews. And they said, no, we don't want to kill you. We want to hire you.
Yeah.
He says, I don't need money, but if you get me off of, who's the guy who wrote all the books on anti-Nazi hunting?
Wiesenthal. Wiesenthal, Simon
Wiesenthal.
Get him off his hit list.
He says, if you get me off his hit list, I'll take out these scientists that are trying to make a bomb to bomb Israel. So within a month, they were all gone. And then he was a personal bodyguard for Eva Peron in South America. And then it was rumored that he was teaching special forces Americans guerrilla warfare. To wit, my captain, Jaime Roche. And so whenever we were on a mission, and I got this guy who can never be killed because he's been fighting for 12 years, got this German who's got a war machine, you know, and I'm trying to be in between with common sense, you know, and you can't be diplomatic with a German Prussian captain, you know, and the other guy won't listen because you're too young.
Yeah. No, that was an interesting time for SF because there were other influences of just those ardent anti-communists who were, you know, were coming from anywhere they could. Yeah. You know, it's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, so, a lot of the Germans who fought for Germany in World War II were actually anti-Soviets. They were anti-communist. They wanted to get the Russians. They weren't even aware, some of them, of Nazism.
Right.
The Legion, Foreign Legion, fought at Dien Bien Phu. Over, you know, I don't want to quote percentages, but more than half were former German guys, and it was kind of, again, I don't mean, but fascinating story. You read about Dien Bien Phu, the Legion's role in Indochina and Dien Bien Phu. They even had some former concentration camp guys in the same units as Germans. Somehow the Legion made it work. Or they made it work. It's extraordinary.
So were you still at Command Control Central as part of this reaction for the Mike Forrest Hatch Force?
Yes.
And how was that, like, different for you from going from recon to now you're on reaction force?
Yeah, you don't have to be quite so sneaky. Sometimes you don't even want to be sneaky. You want to come and get us, you know.
Yeah.
You can actually cook a meal if you wanted to. I never did. that one of the bad points was that if you got in trouble and a recon team was in trouble, they figured you could fend for yourself. We're going to help the recon. Makes sense. But you're lower priority on support. Other than that, it just seemed a little bit more comfortable, other than the fact you're going to slug it out. Whereas in recon, you can break contact, evade, and then continue the mission if it's possible. A lot of guys would break contact in a recon and go day after day being chased, and they would break contact and all this stuff and continue on.
Now, as a reaction force, was your primary mission to help troops that are American troops American troops that were already in contact, or was it when an element had been spotted to go in and engage them regardless if there were U.S. troops in contact?
Both of those are possible. The other ones are search and destroy.
Okay.
You find lucrative targets and get rid of them. Another one would be road interdiction, where they would put the people in right on top of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And we've actually had a recon team who did that, Team California once. But we had companies or platoons. They would come in. They'd have their rifles and their shovels and their food and ammo and 150 sandbags, just empties. And they would just plop down there and they'd make a fort, and they'd knock out the first and the last vehicle of a convoy, call in airstrikes, and basically announce nothing is going to pass this highway until we say so. And they'll spend a week there stopping all traffic on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Prisoner snatches is a possibility. More prisoner rescues than snatches, because it's more of a recon thing to snatch a POW than it is a company.
Were there successful prisoner rescues, like before they got a prisoner to a camp or something like that?
There were some. There were Americans, you mean?
Yeah.
I'm not sure about Americans. I know the book I'm writing now with about Ed Zebrin and some of the other people. I know the SEALs overran a POW camp. They were all South Vietnamese, but they got some out. And then, of course, the sadness is that we are so skeptical about our American government sometimes that we don't think that they even want them. I've covered that quite a bit in the book, but not Quezon. What's the one 20 miles from Hanoi?
Sante.
The scuttlebutt is that the reason Sante was picked was that they knew the prisoners were gone. And kind of a sad thing. But I mean, it was 20 miles from Hanoi. There were 10 miles away. There was 12,000 NVA troops in a base, and it was so gutsy. 50 some SF guys went in and did it. Went flawless.
Bull Simmons, right?
Yeah, Bull Simmons. Yeah.
Simmons.
Yeah.
Who subsequently was Ross Perot hired him to do the Iraq. Iran. 1979, right? That's an interesting story too.
Yes, I remember when the first few of my SOAR special ops reunions that I went to. Ross Perot would go to those, and he had $1 million reward for anyone who could get an American POW out.
Really?
I covered the POWs quite a bit in the book, and how cynical I got because of the previous wars, how we left them deliberately. And I covered John Noble and his thing. When I was in 6th grade, I saw him and talked to him in a Lyceum, but he was an American German. He was an American citizen who was German, and his family had a factory in Germany. So when Hitler took over and stuff, they seized the factory, and he just happened to be over there checking his factory, and so they put him in a concentration camp. And he wound up spending the whole war in a concentration camp along with American soldiers. And at the end of the war, Russia overran Germany, and they stole everything. They took the trains and they filled them up with everything they could out of Germany. But they instead of freeing any of the POWs, they just made German POWs, Russian POWs. So John Noble was there with thousands of Americans sent to the Gulag. And he had a phenomenal memory. And John Noble had the lists and personal data to memory of over 5,000 American POWs. And
Wow.
when in 1958, I think it was, I was in 6th grade, and I heard him speak at a lyceum, talked to him at length, and the way he got out is that somehow a Swiss diplomat happened to be in the area, and he got his a piece of paper with his name and contact information that went directly to Eisenhower, and Eisenhower got him out. But he said there was zero emphasis about getting any of those people, and he said to the time when I graduated out of high school, not a single American was freed, none. We left every one of them.
That's
Yeah.
That's an incredible story.
And it gets worse. It gets more timely. When the war ended, our technology isn't as good as what yours is, but we knew where all of our prisoners were. We knew by name if they're in a bamboo hutch, if they're in Czechoslovakia, if they're in Laos, Cambodia. We knew where they were, and we had a list. Well, Henry Kissinger in Operation Homecoming had that list. And when they started releasing them, they'd come off the plane and stuff. He checked the names off the list. Well, anyway, there were 600 names that we knew that they had, mainly pilots and special forces people who didn't get released, and we know that they had them. And so Kissinger folded up the list and put it in his pocket, and he said, that's acceptable casualties for peace. And years later, 5 or 6 years ago, they asked him what was the most regrettable thing of his entire life. And he says, that list of paper. That. So we have a history of leaving POWs. It's an awful thing. I'll tell you another one. I know your tape is going to go forever. Bob Howard, most decorated man in American history, was sent to get POWs out. And he and I used to know the names of the other two guys, 3 Americans. They went across the lines, and they found a base. And the interesting thing was, there's a typical thing where the United States government thought it was empty. That's why they sent him. Well, anyway, he went over there, and there was 20-some American POWs that he could see.
He
was on a ridgeline in the military crest, and they were down there. He could see them, and he could see the enemy soldiers, but he knew that we could take them. So he sends back the message that ultimately goes to wherever, Washington, D.C. or something. The return message that came back was liquidate the merchandise.
What?
Liquidate the merchandise.
Jesus.
Yeah, so he refused. And when he came back, they arrested him.
This is the most decorated.
Yeah, that was
American.
the problem with him. They arrested him as a deserter. And all of a sudden, the State Department says, you can't charge the most decorated man in American history with desertion. And the other guy, I forgot his name now. It's almost where I can say it. But that night, he took off. He says, I'm not having any of this. And he took off. And he was stabbed in an alley in Bangkok. But he lived. There's a book called Kiss the Boys Goodbye. And that's pretty interesting.
When was this? When Howard did this? It was
late. It was late.
It was after the ground forces had been withdrawn post.
Yeah, it was post
73, right? 73 was when the. So it was 73 when the very last ground troops were pulled out, except for the advisors, right?
Yeah,
or was it 71?
Yeah, I don't know that.
Because there were advisors still on the ground in 73 for the spring offensive.
Yeah.
But in any case, you're saying it's late in the war, and he was. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
something I don't understand.
It's an aspect.
Another one.
Go ahead.
Robert Garwood was a Marine, and he was a private first class, and he was a POW, and nothing wrong with him. He was a bona fide captive GI, Marine. You don't call them GIs, do you? Okay. Marine.
Grunt.
Okay. But anyway, he was captured, and it turns out at home he was a mechanic. And so the NVA couldn't put the vehicles back together. They're stalling on the highway. So Garwood was the one that they'd have a guy to watch from, and he would go down and he'd fix the vehicles along the highway. Well, one time a Swiss or somebody happened to come by, and he says, "My name's Robert Garwood, and I'm a POW." And the word come out, and Robert Garwood got released by the personal intervention of the United States government, and they got him out. But the problem is the moment his plane landed, he was branded as a deserter. And to this day, he's never been interviewed about the American POWs that he knows.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, they've never interviewed him because who cares what a deserter says? And so they simply destroyed the messenger. You know, I interrupted you. It was
no. You didn't at all. I was simply following up on something you'd said. Something you'd said too reminds me of the story. Who was the guy? Doug Hardcastle, the sailor, 18-year-old sailor, fell off an aircraft carrier, right? Or
yes.
Off the coast of North Vietnam.
Yes.
And he memorized, I forget how many names.
Yes, I remember that story.
It's an extraordinary story, similar to that.
Yeah.
But so many. So afterwards, and at least this is what they taught us at CS School, that so many POWs who were released attribute it to the fact that this 18-year-old kid had memorized their names and said, "No, I've seen this guy.
Yes.
He's still alive," and had gone public and told their families and everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a. He came to talk to us at CS School, actually. Became a professor. Anyway, I'm wobbling on, but I find the topic. I think the reason why we find this so incredibly disturbing, well, it's obvious why we find it so. It's okay. We accept the fact we may be killed in combat when we go to. We accept the fact we may be taken prisoner, but there's always a feeling that, that loyalty works both ways to some extent, right?
Yeah. And I think the loyalty we had in SF is that if we were captured, you can count on the guys to go get you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about sorry, Dave? Was it?
No, I was just. It's just weird to me how many ways Afghanistan mirrors Vietnam, and not that we had U.S. POWs. But we left a lot of Americans just on the ground outside the wire when we pulled out. Like people who couldn't get into the airport, people who were still in place for whatever reason. And the way we treated the Afghan, not everybody. Like there were elements. There were people who worked hard to get Afghans out, our peers but the way we treat the Montagnards and Nungs, everybody who worked with us, it's just very frustrating.
The way the institution
to think that it, it was 50 years later, and we fought the exact same war, did the exact same thing. I mean, from the Vietnamification, just all of it. It's conventional leaders not trusting the soft to handle. It's so bizarre to me.
Yeah, at least we didn't have lawyers okaying the hit before we shot, like you guys did.
Yeah. That happened. I mean, I know to a lot to where it became like the rules of engagement just got.
The institution sometimes becomes mindless.
But I've seen it in police work once, and I know I've seen it. I've heard of a similar kind of a thing in military. But a criminal is shooting at the cop, and he shoots, or the soldier, and then he's changing magazines, and the cop happens to shoot before the new magazine is in, and he just shot an unarmed man. And they go after him for that. Yeah. It's just insane.
Yeah, it's wild. Anyway, I want to make sure we finished talking about you. So you did this time with the reaction forces. What about after that?
After that, I spent, of course, the last month or so, 2 months maybe. They don't want you to get killed, So I was just in security, and
okay.
ran the security of the company and stuff like that, Yeah,
It's been a good
And all
vacation.
told, like how much
Yeah.
time did you do, you know, during, not necessarily in country, but like during the Vietnam War? How much time were you in service during that time?
a little under 4 years.
Yeah.
So I made 7 at 5, you know, and so I was kind of on a fast track, but I wasn't sure to stay in. You know, everyone says get out and you know, see what you want to do, and I got out in inertia. You know, you get out, you know, almost need an event to get you back.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And how did you deal with that inertia? Because you had been going, I mean, you had the security bit, but you had been in these extremely high, like, stress environments for so long.
Yeah, I still I still have the reactions. A loud noise, somebody come up. It gets me. I come on guard. A lot of times people come up behind or quickly or certain things. You know, I do not like my back against a door. You know, you probably do the same thing. But I've got those things, and I try to relegate that into reaction and training rather than nervousness and things like that. So I really adapted well, and I think a lot of it was because I never had any what do you call it, de-escalation time. I never had any of that. Just the next day you're home, you know, and but I was doing fine. It worked. Decided I was going to go to flight school and, you know, maybe be a pilot. And if I was going to write books, you could fly. If I was going to be a farmer, I could dust my crops, you know, or be a bush pilot in Alaska, you know, whatever it would be, you know. So I started doing that and did the aerobatics and the gliders and all that kind of a thing, and met my wife and then wound up in Alaska. And it's interesting too because I wound up in police work, and I never wanted to be a cop in my life. And I was in California, and I was a superintendent of oilers in a steel mill. I got hired on the basis of the fact that I was special forces. My wife got a job there, and they never hired a spouse, you know, a family member. And they said to the personnel director, he said he made E7 in 5 years. They said bring him in, he's hired. So I was their supervisor there, and but the thing was is that my employees working for me made twice as much as I did. I had to sometimes do a paycheck and a half to make the rent, you know. And this is crazy. So I signed up to be a cop. I saw it in a newspaper, and they were looking to fill in a policeman. So I went up to take the test, and I was naive, you know, California, and anyway, I went in, and it was a high school coliseum, and there was 1,200 people taking the test for 2 positions. And so I took it, and I scored in the top 3. And you know, cold. There were people going to school to take the test. Well, anyway, I scored in the top 3, and I went to the board, and the first person asked the first question, "Have you ever killed anyone?" That was a kiss of death. And my boss, who was a Marine, and he owned the factory, wanted to promote me. And he was wondering why, what basis did they have that they didn't want me, because it might affect his decision. He says, we can't have anyone who's like that walking our city with a gun. And so it's just crazy. So I went to Alaska, my wife and I didn't like cities and all that. And same kind of a thing, not much for work. So I was teaching martial arts in the colleges. There's 2 colleges. And all the cops and the troopers were my students. So as soon as there was an opening in the police department, they said, you're going to be a cop. You know, a new form of arrest. You know, they hand-delivered me to the chief, and I took the test and got a 98 and became their cop, you know, and went to the academy, undergraduate out of that, you know. So I was on a kind of a fast track with one bad thing. I arrested people. And you don't want, they don't want you to arrest, and also they have you swear that you're going to do it. But anyway, a long way to say something simple is that we had a domestic terrorist in town. He came in, and I had to take him out. And they found out that there was a drop of non-white blood in him, and so they said it was racist and all that stuff. They had hitmen to kill me. For more than a year, I had to have a mirror and check for bombs under the car. when I started the car, I had to have the doors open in case it went off. I could get blown out maybe instead of blown up. And it was interesting at a time. But anyway, that's supposed to be leading to something.
No, I'm so just
we just
where
wanna-
did your life go? And
So anyway, at the end of it all, nobody dared to hire me because they were afraid their businesses would be blown up or sabotaged. So I was carving something, a piece of ivory. No, it was a piece of stone, soapstone, and I carved a seal out of the soapstone. And one of the artists came by the house. A friend of mine, one of my hunting partners. He's a painter, and he came by and he says, "Hey, that's good." He says that could sell for about $1,200. Wow, never quantified things that way. Yeah. I thought of Caliber's talent, And then later on in the same week, 4 things happened in 1 week. Later on the same week, I was carving an ivory whale. And I don't know where I got the ivory, but I was carving with the most arcane, basic tools, files and knives, And I carved a whale, and he came by. He says, "That's really good." And so he says, "Here, give me that." And he came back an hour later and gave me a check for $200. And he said, "I sold it to a gallery," and I didn't even have it on the base yet. And then he called me up that afternoon to say that the gallery had already sold it for $400 that day. And then the 4th thing happened that week was that the best carver in Alaska came by. He's kind of a legend of sorts. Came by the house, and he, I don't know if you know what the old lard cans they had on the farm, those big square cans they used to have lard in. Well, he came by, he had one of those that was all clean. It was full of ivory scraps. And he just walked in, and he says, "Hi, my name's Jim Fleshman." And he walked in to my dining room table. He just dumped the whole thing out. He says, "Here, pick out what you want." I never met the guy before. And so right away I did a quick calculation. I'm going to take things that are labor intensive rather than material intensive, because I didn't know what he was going to charge. And all I had was my retirement and what I had in my retirement system that pulled out. So anyway, I pulled out what I dared to. And he said, "Well, you're going to need some accents. You're going to need some bases." And he pushed a bunch more. And I said, "Well, how much do I owe you?" And he just took his arm and he put what I didn't want, slid it back into the can and headed for the door. And he says, "Nothing. God told me to bring it over here."
Wow.
Yeah. And so I told my wife, I says, as dumb as I am, I said, there's something to this.
And your carvings, for anybody who wants to, your carvings are amazing, and it's so amazing to me that you just started doing it and you were good at it. Yeah. And if you guys want to check out Dale's carvings, check them out at dale-hanson-studio.com. Amazing work.
You probably
and
don't
also
need the dash.
The book, the book too. Books. Born Twice is the book. Really, the Dale stories have come through this, but there are a lot of stories in the book that we didn't have time to cover here. If you just read the first few pages of this, I guarantee you won't put it down. If you're a human being.
And let's talk about your other books too, because you have poetry, you have haikus.
Yeah, the haiku was interesting because I started writing haiku in Vietnam. It was an Oriental poem, 17 syllables, and I started writing them. And the first section has things about Vietnam, and then I did something in the book at the beginning, what I called word pictures. And I never heard of the term, but I made it up myself, called word pictures. Instead of writing a picture or writing a story, I just wanted to write a short paragraph or description so that if you were in combat or in war and read that, you'd say, that's exactly what it was like. Well, anyway, I published that first one and I brought it to the SOAR reunion. And on the basis of that book, everybody says you got to write the Vietnam one, which is the 4th book I wrote. And I had so many things in the fire that I was doing that I decided to finish those next 2 books, which I enjoyed an awful lot.
And so we have the Last White Seal Hunter, which is a fiction. It's a novel,
right?
Correct.
Right. World War I soldier, comes back out of the war, and he wants to have the last great adventure. So he goes to Alaska, and he meets all the great people that made Alaska and all the great adventures.
That's amazing.
What a great concept for a book.
Yeah, and then short stories, The Great Catch.
Right, short stories. And my whole philosophy on writing is I want good literature, because we can all pen something down. We can, as we're talking, we've probably said all kinds of things we could have said better. And we all make mistakes when we're talking, but I sure don't want to put them in print. You know, so I wanted good literature.
It forces you to take the time and discipline to
Yeah.
put your thoughts down in a coherent manner, and it's
So when did
Not
you
easy.
publish your first book? Because you have 4 books out now right now, and you're working on a 5th, right? And when was your first book published?
Probably 7, 8, 9 years ago. I don't remember exactly.
So a while after Vietnam. So
Yeah,
I mean,
a long
like,
time after. Yeah, it's raising a family and teaching martial arts and all that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
You just, family has so much, but I had so many things I wanted to do. And of course, the hunting and getting the moose and the caribou and all that kind of stuff. But my whole life and attention was so bifurcated that there's no time to sit down and say, this is what I want to do.
Right.
But I wanted good literature. And I look back at all the books that I've got a good library, maybe certainly 1,000 books in it. And I look at the books and say, which are the books that I would read twice? Or which are the ones that have lasted the centuries? The Herman Melville, all the rest of them. And what it was different, they didn't curse, they didn't have sex, they didn't have any of these things. They just had good literature, and the values were there. And I said, if I'm going to write and take the time to write, I want the kind of a book that you'd say it was a good book. It's well worth reading more than once, and I can recommend it to my son. I wouldn't be embarrassed, and I wouldn't have to say there's a lot of cursing and there's things you want to skip. So I wanted good literature, and I'm reading things now that I read 30 years ago, and I'm belaboring it. I didn't want soft cover. I didn't want to write a book where the only reason to read it is to see how it ended, and it winds up being left in the toilet seat in the subway. Because it's done, and you know how that ended.
So you've written 4 books in about 8 years. How many carvings have you done in about that time frame?
Original carvings since Vietnam, about 17,000.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, 17,000. Because I mean, all these carvers, they say, "Oh, I'm a carver," and all this stuff. How many have you done in your life? 100, 50. Well, that's just an accidental carver. If you're supporting a family, you finish a carving, you keep on going, and like the last half of that story, how I got started, after the guy just swept back all the scraps. I told my wife, I says, there's something that can't be ignored here. This is something to it. I says, but this guy, who's the best carver in North America, perhaps, was a peddler, and his rent would be due. He would do a carving. He'd go sell the carving, And I said, I'm going to get us an honest shot. I'm going to carve faithfully every day, all winter long. And when spring comes, I'm going to have an inventory. Spring came, I had a whole inventory, filled the whole table, and I invited all the retailers to come by. And by noon, every piece was gone, and I had orders for 500 carvings. And it was like that for the next 30 years. Just carve. And the gratifying thing is well, 2 things, but one is that God created us, and I think we have this thing as His creatures. We like to make things, and the other thing is, this is one thing I can do where I control the outcome. I go on a mission and stuff, and half my people are killed, and we don't even find the result. Or I arrest some guy who's beat his wife to death, and he's out on the street in a year. It's like you have no control of the end.
It's just you and the material and
yes. And the most gratifying of all is I started with ivory, precious. I could be a pork carver, and the ivory would carry over the work. End up with wood, which you burn in your stove, and the only reason anyone would look twice is what you did for it.
Yeah.
And so that is kind of a way to look at what I'm doing. It pays for the bills, and I create something.
I think there's another way too, Dale. I mean, I really like the fact that you could wallow in the bankruptcy of human nature, right? So you've had experience of it. The whole thing about hiring as a cop, and then when you don't get hired, and you could spend every day just getting pissed about that, but you don't even dwell on it in your story. Instead, you talk about this guy who came in. You've come back to him 3 or 4 times because he changed your life, right? The guy who came in, but he changed your life because you let him, right? And then, so I mean, it's not. I'm not waxing philosophical here. I'm just saying that in the 2 or 3 hours we spent talking, you've talked about people who are inspirations to you, and you've held on to that.
Yes.
You haven't spent a lot of time, and no one would blame you if you did, talking about all the shitty things that happened or blaming things to that.
Yeah, God has always put good mentors, good people in my path. Whether it's Bob Howard or Norm Doney or a high school teacher will give you just one word of wisdom.
But you got to be willing to accept it and run with it, right? And Oh, it's been a terrific conversation.
I mean,
wonderful.
And I know there's so much more that we can talk about. I just
you have a small bladder.
No, it's. We've kept you here for over 3 hours, but your
I've
story,
enjoyed every minute.
Your story is incredible, and we are so glad that we could get you down here, because as nice as Alaska is for the weather and, the seal hunting, I mean, for what it is, it's obviously not great for internet connections.
Oh, no kidding.
That's a good reason to like it.
Right. Yeah. So people can find your books on Amazon and look, get at a bare minimum, read Born Twice. If you like our show, and we assume you do since you're watching it, you'll love this book.
3 hours.
This. I haven't read this. I'm sorry I haven't yet, but it just has sort of like the Jack London feel, the adventure type of thing.
It's interesting, and I'm interrupting as you're closing. Jack London wrote over 100 books, lived all the adventure, was in the South Sea, was out of San Francisco fishing and all this stuff. When he was in Alaska, he did the gold rush. When you last saw him, and I got him in the book, and you see all the pictures of Jack London, very handsome guy. You'd like to look like him yourself, It's not how he looked at the end. He lost all of his teeth. His jaw was completely ruined. His one side was paralyzed because as he was living the adventures, he had a scurvy. The scurvy was so bad. And Jack London, for all of his years, died at age 40. And I see people, I see it all the time, the great writers of old, and they die at a young age, not that doing good things that makes you young, but what they accomplished.
Yeah.
It's like I feel so guilty when I see how much they have done and how little I have done,
You've written 4, okay. You haven't done little. So, right now I feel like I should go home and write or do something because I've done little, great short stories. And, man, everybody loves a haiku. Everybody loves a haiku. So, and also Dale Hanson Gallery.
Dale Hanson Studio. That's it.
Dale dash.
You don't even have to do it. Just Dale Hanson Studio.
Oh, you don't have to do the dash?
Yeah.
The link's in the description.
Okay. Links in the description. But is there any place else people can find you if, to check out your stuff aside from everything we talked about?
I think Nook, we came out on Audible, if that's what you mean. Barnes and Noble and Kindle and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So that is it. Thank you very much, everybody. We deeply appreciate it. And we deeply appreciate you being. Say again?
Thanks, Andy, for co-hosting.
Yes, thank you, Andy, for co-hosting.
This is great. This has been,
Really appreciate it.
yeah, I'll come back at your invitation.
You're always invited.
If something ever happens to Jack or Dave, God forbid.
Yep. So thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Oh, wait. Did we already close out? We have some questions. Let me get to those questions real quick. I really apologize. Usually Jack's closing and I'm looking up questions. But let's see here. Let me just get these few questions. I apologize, everybody. Do we have questions? Okay. Actually, Cat Chaser, thank you very much for the sticker. And then we had a couple questions on Patreon. Well, we talked about we talked about how MACV-SOG was compromised. So, Jimbo, I hope we answered that question for you. And Isaac, did you or anyone you know ever come across evidence of Russians in Vietnam?
Yes. There's a very good story on that. We had some black deserters, and on other occasions, Russian advisors, and the recon teams are finding them. And there's an excellent story, and the guy's still alive. He's old, but Norm Doney was telling me about him. But anyway, we kept having reports about Russians advising him and compromising our American teams. So anyway, his name is Dennison, the American guy. But anyway, he went out. He says, I'm going to get those Russians. And he went out and sent a recon team, and he ambushed the Russians and cut their heads off. He brought a sandbag with him, and he dumped their heads in the sandbag, got back to the FOB, the CNC, and caught the first plane to Saigon, and got to the country team. The country team is usually the ambassador, commanding general, all that stuff, the people who run the war. And he just burst right in, walked into the business meeting, took the sandbag and rolled the heads out onto the table. And then he went over to the ambassador and he pried the mouth open on this Russian. He says, see those teeth? Russian. And he left the room. He went back to the FOB.
That's amazing. And,
Any repercussions?
Huh?
Any repercussions?
I don't think you want to mess with a guy like that.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, like people say, chopping a head off, it's a horrible thing. But in this context, how else do you prove that you've got Russians? You can't take the whole bodies back with you.
Right.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
You take the picture and it's kind of blurry.
Right. So, all right, that's it. Thank you, everybody. We deeply appreciate it.